Hello, sleepy traveller. Tuck yourself in, dim the room, and prepare for a peaceful drift through uneventful history. We'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment if you'd like to share. You're standing at the edge of a jagged cliff, the wind whipping around you like an overzealous storyteller. Below, a fortress rises defiantly from the rocky embrace of the Elburz Mountains in northern Persia. Welcome to Alamut Castle, circa 190, home to the Nizari Ismailis, the enigmatic group whose name would echo through history as the Assassins. But before you dive into tales of cloaked figures and whispered secrets, let's strip away the veil of myth and get down to the gritty reality. The Nizari Ismailis were not your run-of-the-mill medieval secret society. They were a splinter group of Shia Islam, with a knack for strategic brilliance and a taste for the dramatic. Led by Hassan-i Sabah, the original mastermind, they seized Alamut Castle, a real fixer-upper in the mountains, yet a perfect spot to practice the fine art of subterfuge. Imagine the real estate pitch. Breathtaking views, remote location, perfect for clandestine activities. Now, a quick lesson in geography. Alamut is about 100 kilometers northwest of Tehran. The strategic perch was no random choice. It was a tactical move, perfectly positioned to keep an eye on the Seljuk Empire, which wasn't exactly the friendliest of neighbours. The Seljuks were the dominant political force, and they weren't thrilled about the Nizaris setting up shop in their backyard. Think of it like that nosy neighbour who suddenly decides to build a fortress and start a revolution from their garage. Economically, Alamut wasn't just a spooky stone castle on a hill. It was a self-sustaining community. They had granaries, water supplies, and even their own form of currency. Yes, these guys were medieval prepper royalty. They knew that to wage a war of subterfuge, you needed more than just daggers and dramatic cloaks. You needed cold, hard cash, or at least a sustainable economy capable of feeding your followers and fueling your plans. This brings us to the infamous legends that have swirled around the Nizari Ismailis like a thick, intoxicating smoke. Ah, the hashish legends. The very word assassin is said to derive from hashashin, supposedly because these operatives indulged in hashish to prepare for their missions. Cue images of dazed warriors, high as kites, stumbling into the night. But if you're picturing stone ninjas, you've fallen for one of history's more persistent and colourful myths. While the allure of hashish-fueled assassins is tempting, the evidence is sketchy at best. The rumour mill of the medieval world was as active as a 21st century tabloid, and these stories likely originated from rival factions looking to discredit the Nizaris. In reality, the Nizaris' success came from meticulous planning and intense devotion, not drug-induced hallucinations. This is where we pivot to the economic realities that kept the Nizaris in play. Alamut was not just a hideaway, it was a hub of espionage and strategy. They levied taxes, controlled trade routes, and occasionally, yes, engaged in a bit of good old-fashioned plunder. This wasn't just a bunch of guys in robes plotting in a smoky back room. It was a well-oiled machine, a miniature state with its own rules and economy. Hassan-i Sabah, the brains behind this operation, was a man with a plan. A former student of theology and a keen strategist, he turned religious zeal into political leverage. He transformed his followers into an elite force capable of striking fear into the hearts of the mighty Seljuks. The Nizari network extended far beyond Alamut, tapping into a web of agents and sympathizers that spanned the region. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Nizari Ismailis was their use of assassination as a political tool. Let's be clear, this wasn't a bloodthirsty pursuit of chaos. Each hit was calculated, a move on a chessboard where kings and sultans were the pawns. They didn't strike indiscriminately, but targeted key figures whose removal would cause maximum disruption to their enemies' plans. The Nizaris were the original practitioners of psychological warfare, their actions sending a chilling message: no one was beyond reach. These assassins weren't just thugs. They were highly trained operatives, often cloaked in the guise of ordinary citizens. They blended in, observed, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. In a world without surveillance cameras or social media, they were the ultimate undercover agents, masters of disguise and deception. But what about the tales of paradise promised to young initiates? The garden of delights waiting for those who pledged their lives to the cause? More myth-making. While Hassani Sabah was undoubtedly persuasive, the idea that he lured recruits with promises of heavenly rewards is likely an exaggeration. Sure, the Nizaris believed in their cause with religious fervour, but they were also savvy enough to recognise the power of a good story when it suited their needs. As we peel back the layers of legend, what emerges is a picture of the Nizari Ismailis as pragmatic and resourceful, their actions driven by strategic necessity rather than wild fanaticism. They were a thorn in the side of the Seljuk Empire, a reminder that power could be challenged by those willing to think outside the medieval box. In a world where the strong ruled by might, the Nizaris proved that intelligence and cunning could level the playing field. They may have been painted as villains in the annals of history, but their story is one of resilience and ingenuity. As you stand atop the cliffs of Alamut, with the wind whispering secrets from centuries past, it's clear that the real legacy of the Nizari Ismailis is far more fascinating than any myth. So, keep your daggers sharp and your wits sharper. There's more to this tale than meets the eye. As the wind continues to murmur secrets from the past, you can't help but marvel at the Nizari Ismailis' uncanny ability to play the long game. Their tactical brilliance was like a medieval chess match, where each move was calculated, and every capture had ripple effects across the board. They weren't just reacting to the world around them, they were shaping it, particularly during the Crusades, a chaotic clash of cultures and faiths that turned the medieval world into a geopolitical Rubik's Cube. Speaking of moves that would make any grandmaster proud, let's dive into one of the most infamous plays in their strategic repertoire, the assassination of Conrad of Montferrat in 1192. Picture this, the bustling port city of Tyre, a slice of the Levantine coast that was as hotly contested as the last slice of pizza at a medieval feast. Conrad was just days away from being crowned King of Jerusalem, a title more coveted than a seat at the Round Table. Now, Conrad wasn't exactly the most amiable fellow at the medieval mixer. Known for his scheming and ambition, he made enemies faster than a catapult hurls stones. But what really set his fate in motion was his delicate dance with power. You see, Jerusalem was a glittering prize in the Crusades, a city that was less about religious fervour and more about strategic dominance. Controlling Jerusalem meant controlling trade routes, influence, and, ultimately, the fate of the Holy Land. Enter the Nizari Ismailis, masters of the covert operation. On April 28, 1192, while Conrad was returning from a pleasant meal, probably congratulating himself on his impending kingship, two assassins, disguised as Christian monks, approached. Armed with daggers rather than elaborate plots, they struck swiftly. Conrad fell, and with him the plans of many a crusading lord. The impact of this assassination was seismic. It sent shock waves through the power dynamics of the Crusades, a reminder that the Nizaris could topple kingdoms with the flick of a blade. This wasn't just about eliminating a rival. It was a strategic checkmate that altered alliances and forced rulers to think twice before underestimating the reach of Alamut. Now, let's debunk the myth that the Nizaris were bloodthirsty zealots blindly following orders. Their methods were coldly pragmatic. Assassinations were not random acts of violence, but carefully chosen actions meant to serve a larger purpose. Each target was selected for their influence on the political chessboard, their removal calculated to maximize disruption. Conrad's assassination was more than a simple hit job. It was a power play that demonstrated the Nizaris' unparalleled influence. They were like medieval venture capitalists, investing in chaos to yield political dividends. This ability to leverage fear and precision over brute force made them a singular force in the power dynamics of the Crusades. But what about the money trail? A clandestine operation of this magnitude didn't come cheap. The Nizaris were not just ideologues, they were economic realists. They understood the need for financial resources to fuel their operations. Alamut was a bustling hub of economic activity, funding their campaigns through a mix of taxation, trade control, and, when necessary, strategic plunder. They were the original entrepreneurs of espionage, ensuring their coffers were as sharp as their daggers. And let's not forget the political context. The Crusades were as much about territorial expansion and economic opportunity as they were about religious conquest. The Nizaris, with their unique position in the region, were the wild card in this global game of thrones. Their alliances were fluid, shifting like the sands of the desert, allowing them to play both sides against the middle. The mythologized image of the Nizaris as shadowy figures lurking in the dark belies the reality of their political acumen. They were not mere instruments of terror, but strategic operators who understood that fear was a currency more potent than gold. Their actions sent a clear message: their reach was limitless, and their enemies would do well to sleep with one eye open. Let's take a quick detour into the world of medieval intelligence networks. The Nizaris were the precursors to modern-day intelligence agencies, with a network of spies and informants that rivaled any contemporary cloak-and-dagger operation. Their agents infiltrated courts and communities, gathering information and waiting for the precise moment to strike. This wasn't just about espionage, it was about creating an aura of omnipresence, making them the bogeymen of medieval politics. While the legends often paint a picture of the Nizaris as mystical warriors, the truth is far more intriguing. They were architects of chaos with a clear blueprint for political influence. In a time when brute force was the language of power, the Nizaris spoke in whispers, their influence echoing across the lands like a quiet storm. As the story of the Nizari Ismailis unfolds, it's evident that their legacy is not just one of mystery and legend, but of strategic brilliance and political astuteness. Their actions during the Crusades weren't just about survival, they were about redefining power in an age where might was right. They were players in a game where the stakes were nothing less than the fate of nations. So, as we stand on the cliffs of Alamut, the wind still carrying tales from centuries past, it's clear that the real story of the Nizari Ismailis is as complex and compelling as any epic saga. They're not just shadowy figures from history, they're a testament to the power of intelligence, strategy, and the ability to see beyond the immediate to the possible. Stay tuned, because the tale of these medieval masterminds is far from over. As we linger on the windswept cliffs of Alamut, let's shift our gaze from the grand chessboard of medieval politics to the nitty-gritty of daily life among the Nizari Ismailis. You might be picturing a group of hooded figures shuffling between secret meetings and dramatic assassinations, but hold that thought. The reality, as it often is far more mundane and yet infinitely more interesting. Let's start with the recruits. The Nizari Ismailis weren't just pulling people off the street and handing them a dagger. These recruits underwent rigorous training, more akin to a medieval boot camp than a mystical initiation. Young men, often in their teens, would find themselves at the gates of Alamut, ready to pledge their loyalty. But before they could become part of this elite network, they had to endure a training regimen that would make a Navy SEAL break a sweat. Physical conditioning was crucial. You needed to be agile enough to scale walls, swift enough to vanish into a crowd, and strong enough to hold your own in a fight. This wasn't just about pumping iron, think more along the lines of parkour, medieval style. Recruits practiced climbing, running, and using weapons until it became second nature. And if you think this sounds like a medieval CrossFit session, you're not far off. But physical prowess was only part of the equation. The Nizaris placed a heavy emphasis on education, a rarity in an era when literacy was often reserved for monks and the elite. Recruits were taught languages, philosophy, theology, and the art of persuasion. They needed to be convincing, adaptable, able to blend into any crowd. Imagine a syllabus that included everything from Rumi to rhetoric, a curriculum designed to create not just warriors, but thinkers. Now, let's talk communication. In a world without email or encrypted messaging apps, the Nizaris had to rely on more old-school methods. Secret messages were often delivered orally or through coded scripts. Picture a medieval version of Snapchat, but without the risk of your message being screenshotted by the wrong person. These messages traveled through a network of couriers who knew that discretion was their most valuable asset. One slip-up, and the whole operation could unravel like a poorly knitted sweater. And let's not forget about the socio-economic backdrop that shaped this clandestine community. Alamut wasn't just a military base, it was a thriving community. The fortress, perched high in the Elburz Mountains, was a self-sufficient hub. Agriculture was crucial. Terraced gardens carved into the rock provided sustenance, growing everything from grains to the occasional medicinal herb. In a pinch, these gardens could sustain the community for months, a necessity when you had powerful neighbours with a penchant for sieges. Trade was another vital component. Despite their isolation, the Nizaris maintained trade routes that allowed them to import luxuries and export goods. They were savvy negotiators, often bartering information as much as goods. This wasn't just about survival. It was about creating an economic ecosystem that could support their ambitions. When you're running a covert network, having a steady supply of resources is just as important as having a sharp blade. Let's puncture another myth while we're at it. The idea that the Nizari Ismailis were guided by mystical practices. While they certainly had spiritual beliefs, the notion that their every move was dictated by some esoteric ritual is a romantic embellishment. Sure, they drew inspiration and motivation from their faith, but they weren't casting spells or consulting crystal balls. Their success was grounded in meticulous planning and strategic thinking, not mystical mumbo-jumbo. Loyalty to the cause was the glue that held this community together. It wasn't just about blind allegiance, it was about a shared vision of a different world order. The Nizaris saw themselves as more than just rebels. They were visionaries, seeking to create a society where their beliefs could thrive. This sense of purpose instilled a fierce dedication among their ranks, a commitment that went beyond personal gain or glory. But let's not sugarcoat it. Living in Alamut wasn't all camaraderie and purpose-driven living. It was a hard life, demanding both physically and mentally. The constant threat from external forces meant that vigilance was a way of life. Everyone had a role to play, whether it was tending the gardens or gathering intelligence, and failure was not an option. The stakes were high, and the cost of failure even higher. So, what's the takeaway here? The Nizari Ismailis weren't just a band of rogues lurking in the shadows. They were a complex society, driven by ideology, sustained by economics, and bound by loyalty. Their lives were a balancing act of faith and pragmatism, strategy and survival. As we continue to unravel their story, remember that the legends, as captivating as they are, often obscure the deeper truths. The real tale of the Nizaris is one of resilience, adaptability, and an unyielding quest for influence in a world where power was the ultimate currency. As we wrap up this chapter of our exploration, let's leave a few threads hanging. There are more layers to peel back, more myths to bust, and more truths to uncover. The story of the Nizari Ismailis is far from finished, and there's still much to learn about their enduring legacy. So, hang tight and keep your curiosity sharp. There's more intrigue on the horizon. So, as we dig deeper into the winding path of the Nizari Ismailis, we stumble upon a turning point that would make any historian reach for the popcorn, the Mongol invasions. Now, if you thought the Nizaris were the only game changers in medieval geopolitics, let me introduce you to the Mongols. Less a chess piece, more a wrecking ball with a penchant for empire building. Picture this. The year is 1256, and Hulagu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, is making his grand entrance onto the Persian stage. Hulagu wasn't just on a casual road trip. He was on a mission to expand the Mongol Empire, which already covered more land than a medieval map-maker could handle. And Alamut? It was on his itinerary. By this point, the Nizari Ismailis had been playing the political chess game for over a century and a half, outlasting many foes. But Hulagu's Mongols? A different breed entirely. While the Nizaris excelled at strategic, surgical strikes, the Mongols excelled in overwhelming, brute force that made the Hulk look like a subtle negotiator. They swept across cities with the kind of efficiency that made even the most fortified castles look like sandcastles before a tide. As Hulagu's forces approached Alamut, the Nizari leadership, then under the command of Imam Ruknu-ud-Din Kersha, faced a conundrum. They could fight, but the Mongols weren't your average medieval adversaries. They brought with them not just armies but a new level of psychological warfare. Rumors of their unstoppable nature preceded them like an eerie prelude to a horror movie. The Nizaris were no strangers to fear as a weapon, but the Mongols took that concept and gave it a masterclass upgrade. Let's talk numbers for a hot second. At its height, the Mongol army could muster tens of thousands of warriors, each one reportedly able to live off the land for days and ride horses that were the medieval equivalent of all-terrain vehicles. Their adaptability was their weapon, their strategy sheer dominance. For the Nizaris, who thrived on precision and secrecy, the Mongols' approach was a nightmare wrapped in chainmail. The siege of Alamut was not a drawn-out affair. The Nizaris, recognizing the futility of resistance against such odds, eventually surrendered. On December the 15th, 1256, Alamut fell, The castle that had stood as a bastion of cunning and strategy was razed, its libraries, repositories of knowledge and secrets, set ablaze. Talk about a black hole for intellectual property. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was a cultural and ideological gut punch. Alamut's fall signalled the end of an era, the extinguishing of a beacon that had flickered defiantly in the mountains. For the Nazaris, it was a devastating blow, but for history, it was the beginning of their legend. As the literal smoke cleared, the metaphorical smoke of myth and legend began to swirl. Now, let's zoom out for a moment. The Mongol invasion wasn't just bad luck for the Nazaris, it was part of a broader geopolitical shift. The Mongols were reshaping the world map, and their expansion was less about conquest and more about rewriting the rules of empire. The Nazaris, with their localized strategy and regional influence, were caught in the crossfire of this tectonic shift. Now, economics, because even in the Middle Ages, it wasn't all swords and sorcery. Maintaining a stronghold like Alamut wasn't as simple as keeping the granary stocked and the guards at their posts. This was a complex operation requiring resources, and lots of them. The Nazaris had managed to create a self-sustaining economy, but the costs of constant vigilance, espionage, and sometimes open conflict were steep. Think of it as running a high-stakes startup where failure wasn't just bankruptcy, but obliteration. As the Mongols swept through, they disrupted trade routes and economic networks that the Nazaris relied on. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was an economic earthquake. The Nazaris found their financial underpinnings crumbling, their carefully constructed economic strategies as vulnerable as their fortress walls. The Mongols didn't just bring swords, they brought systemic change. Let's not forget the human element here. The Nazaris weren't just strategists, they were people, and the cost of maintaining such an organization was as much about human capital as it was about resources. The constant threat of invasion, the need to remain ever vigilant, and the pressure of maintaining their way of life took its toll. This was a community always on the brink, living in a state of perpetual readiness. So, what's the legacy of the Nazari Ismailis post-Alamut? Here's where it gets fascinating. Despite their fall, the Nazaris were romanticized, their image evolving into something larger than life. Their tales of daring and intrigue became the stuff of legend, a medieval noir that captured imaginations long after their actual influence had waned. They were feared, yes, but also admired, an acknowledgement of their audacity and skill in a world that respected power in all its forms. Their legacy became a complex tapestry woven with threads of fear, respect, and myth. The Nazari Ismailis were remembered not just for their fall, but for their resilience, their ability to wield influence from the shadows, and their dedication to a cause greater than themselves. In the end, they were not just players on the stage of history, they were the playwrights of their own narrative, crafting a story that would endure through the ages. As we take a breath and prepare to delve deeper into their story, remember this. The fall of Alamut was not the end of the Nazaris, but a transformation. The Mongols may have shattered their fortress, but they could not extinguish their legend. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the next chapter of this enduring saga, where the shadows of history hold as much intrigue as the light of the present. The Mongols may have shattered their fortress, but they could not extinguish their legend. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the next chapter of this enduring saga, where the shadows of history hold as much intrigue as the light of the present. And speaking of shadows, let's fast forward to the modern world, where the legacy of the Nazari Ismailis has taken on a life all its own, weaving through the fabric of popular culture like an invisible thread pulling at the seams of our collective imagination. Enter the realm of video games, movies, and novels, our contemporary myth-making machines. Here, the medieval assassins of Alamut are less historical figures and more archetypal heroes or anti-heroes, depending on your perspective. Take a stroll through the digital landscapes of the Assassin's Creed series, where you'll find hooded figures leaping from rooftops with the kind of parkour prowess that would put a ninja to shame. The game franchise, launched in 2007 by Ubisoft, has sold over 105 million copies, making it one of the best-selling series of all time. Not bad for a group whose real-life counterparts were more about strategic subtleties than dramatic leaps of faith. But let's not get too lost in the pixels without addressing the obvious. The romanticization of assassins in pop culture often blurs the line between fact and fantasy. The real Nizari Ismailis weren't free-running across ancient cities, they were executing carefully calculated political maneuvers. Their operations were less about acrobatics and more about the long game. Think chess rather than Cirque du Soleil. Yet the allure of the assassin archetype, mysterious, morally complex, wielding power from the shadows, continues to captivate modern audiences. It's a narrative that taps into our fascination with the outsider hero, the rogue agent who challenges the status quo. In literature, the legacy of the Nizaris has been equally enduring. From Vladimir Bartol's Alamut to Dan Brown's Angels and Demons, the mythos of the assassin has been a fertile ground for storytelling. Bartol's novel, penned in 1938, took the Nizari tale and spun it into an allegory of power and manipulation, reflecting the geopolitical tensions of his own time. Meanwhile, Brown's thrillers, while less directly connected to the Nizaris, thrive on a similar blend of conspiracy and hidden knowledge, drawing readers into a world where secret societies pull the strings behind the scenes. And let's not forget Hollywood, where the assassin has become a staple character, cloaked in layers of intrigue and moral ambiguity. Whether it's the stoic hitman of John Wick or the conflicted agents of James Bond, the essence of the assassin has seeped into the cinematic bloodstream. These characters, much like the Nizaris, exist in a liminal space between order and chaos. Their stories a dance of shadows and light. But why does this narrative endure? Why does the image of the assassin continue to resonate with us? The answer lies in the universal themes of power, rebellion, and the human desire to challenge authority. Assassins, both historical and fictional, represent the possibility of change in a world that often feels immutable. They embody the idea that one person, or a small group, can alter the course of history, not through brute force, but through cunning and intellect. Yet, it's crucial to separate myth from reality. The real Nizari Ismailis were not romantic heroes, but pragmatic strategists operating within the harsh realities of medieval geopolitics. Their actions were driven by necessity, their methods a reflection of the tumultuous world they inhabited. They were not motivated by a quest for glory, but by survival and the pursuit of their vision. In the end, their legacy is a testament to the power of narrative, how stories can transform people into legends and keep their memory alive long after they've passed into history. As we wrap up this journey through time, let's take a moment to consider the broader implications of the Nizari Ismailis' legacy. Their story is a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry of human experiences, woven together by the threads of ambition, conflict, and resilience. The Nizaris challenged the dominant powers of their time, not by sheer strength, but by leveraging their understanding of politics and psychology. They were pioneers of asymmetrical warfare, demonstrating that intelligence and strategy could level the playing field in a world dominated by empires. Their influence extended beyond the battlefield, leaving a lasting imprint on the cultural and intellectual landscapes of the regions they touched. The Nizaris were not just warriors but scholars, preserving and contributing to the rich tapestry of Islamic thought and philosophy. Their commitment to education and intellectual pursuit laid the groundwork for future generations, ensuring that their legacy would endure in more ways than one. So, what can we learn from the Nizari Ismailis today? Perhaps it's the understanding that true power lies not in force, but in the ability to think critically, to adapt, and to see the world not just as it is, but as it could be. Their story is one of resilience and ingenuity, a testament to the enduring human spirit that seeks to shape its own destiny in the face of overwhelming odds. As we close this chapter on the Nizari Ismailis, let's carry forward the lessons of their legacy, that the shadows of history are as rich with knowledge as the pages of any textbook, that the allure of the assassin lies not in their deeds alone, but in what they represent, a challenge to the status quo, a whisper of possibility in a world often deafened by the roar of power. And with that, we leave the cliffs of Alamut behind, the winds still carrying whispers of a bygone era, a reminder that history is never truly past, but always a part of our present, waiting to be rediscovered and reimagined. So, keep your curiosity sharp and your mind open. The stories of the past are far from finished, and there's always more to explore in the shadows and beyond. In the world of ancient history, the Aryan tribes were like the ultimate road-tripping hipsters, except instead of VW vans, they had horse-drawn chariots. Back in the day, around 1500 BCE, these nomadic groups embarked on an epic journey that would take them from the steppes of Central Asia all the way to Europe. Now, before you start envisioning them as some sort of noble lineage, let's hit the brakes and debunk a few myths, shall we? First off, the term Aryan has seen more historical misuse than a politician's promise. In its original context, it simply referred to a group of Indo-European-speaking tribes. But fast forward a few millennia, and it gets twisted into all sorts of pseudo-scientific nonsense. The reality? These folks were just trying to find a better place to graze their cattle and settle their families. You know, like any sensible nomad would. The migration of these Aryan tribes wasn't just a casual stroll through ancient lands, it was a full-on cultural caravan. Archaeological evidence shows us that they brought with them a unique set of skills, particularly in metallurgy and horse domestication. You could say they were the original tech-savvy travellers, with their ability to forge stronger metal tools and weapons, which incidentally helped them make friends, or enemies, wherever they went. Speaking of enemies, the Aryans weren't exactly the welcome wagon in every new neighbourhood. As they moseyed into regions like the Indus Valley, they had a knack for shaking things up. Think of them as the ancient world's version of a rock band rolling into town and changing the music scene. They arrived with their own cultural beats, the Vedic traditions. That would eventually lay the groundwork for Hinduism. That's right, from nomads to religious influences, these guys had quite the impact. But let's talk geography for a second. Picture the steppes of Central Asia, where these tribes initially roamed. It was a vast grassland stretching across what's now Kazakhstan and southern Russia, offering the perfect backdrop for a nomadic lifestyle. These plains were the ultimate open road for their cattle and chariots, but they also came with their fair share of hazards. Climate changes, shifting resources, and the occasional invasion by other tribes meant that staying put wasn't always an option. As they moved, the Aryan tribes left behind a trail of artifacts, pottery, burial mounds, and those ever-important chariots that archaeologists today use to piece together their journey. Fun fact, these chariots weren't just for show. They were an essential part of their military might, helping them assert control over new territories. Talk about horsepower. Now, if you're wondering how far these ancient travellers roamed, let me give you a sense of scale. The distance from their starting point in Central Asia to the northern reaches of India, or the fringes of Europe, is roughly 3,000 kilometres. That's like trekking from New York to Los Angeles, but without the benefit of rest stops or GPS. Just pure grit, determination, and maybe a few divine invocations to guide them. Their migration wasn't just a physical journey, it was a cultural odyssey that reshaped the regions they touched. Take the Rig Veda, one of the oldest known texts, which captures the essence of their early religion and social structure. These hymns provide a window into their world, where gods and nature were deeply intertwined and rituals marked the rhythm of life. But hold on. Before we romanticize these ancient wanderers too much, let's pull back the curtain on some of the less savory aspects. The Aryans, like many tribes of the time, were no strangers to conflict. They didn't exactly send out neighbourly welcome baskets when they arrived. Instead, they often engaged in battles to claim territory, resources, and influence. The romantic notion of a peaceful migration is more myth than reality. Yet, it's important to remember that these migrations were not just about conquest or survival. They were about adaptation. The Aryans were masters of it, blending their culture with those they encountered, and in the process, creating something new. This cultural fusion is what makes their story so compelling. They were like the ultimate cultural remixers, taking bits and pieces from each place they visited and incorporating them into their own evolving identity. In the end, the Aryan tribes were a testament to the human spirit's resilience and adaptability. Their journey wasn't just about moving from point A to point B, it was about leaving a lasting legacy that would influence civilizations for centuries to come. And while the myths of their noble lineage may persist, the truth of their story, the tale of migration, conflict, and cultural exchange, is far more fascinating. So, next time you hear the word Aryan, think of them as the original road-tripping hipsters, forever on a quest for new horizons and new stories to tell. So, if you've ever wondered what kept the Aryan tribes from descending into a chaotic free-for-all, Look no further than their unique social structure. Imagine ancient Aryan society as a kind of primitive HOA, where everyone knew their role and was expected to play it. But instead of debates over lawn ornaments, they were more concerned with cosmic order and maintaining social harmony. Let's dive into this fascinating hierarchy. At the top of the Aryan social pyramid were the Brahmins, the priests. Think of them as the spiritual influences of their time, commanding not Instagram followers, but divine favor. These guys were the keepers of the Vedic rituals, the ancient texts that were more sacred than your grandma's secret family recipe. They controlled the religious knowledge and, consequently, the spiritual currency of the tribe. In a world where the gods were as real as the next thunderstorm, having the Brahmins on your side was like having a direct line to customer support for the divine. Next up were the Kshatriyas, the warriors. These folks were the muscle behind the operation, the ones who ensured that the Aryan tribes didn't get pushed around by the neighbors. Picture them as the neighborhood watch, but with swords and a penchant for horseback warfare. They were tasked with protecting the tribe, maintaining order, and occasionally expanding the tribe's territory when the opportunity or necessity arose. In the grand chess game of tribal politics, the Kshatriyas were the knights, always ready to charge into battle. But what's a society without its economic engine? Enter the Vaishyas, the producers and traders. These were the folks who kept the economy humming, managing agriculture, cattle rearing, and trade. They were the equivalent of your local farmers' market vendors, only instead of kale and kombucha, they dealt in grains and livestock. The Vaishyas ensured that the tribe had enough resources to survive and thrive, playing a crucial role in sustaining the social order. Finally, we have the Shudras, the laborers and craftsmen. The Shudras were the backbone of the Aryan economy, the folks who did the essential work that kept the tribe functioning on a day-to-day basis. They might not have had the glamour or prestige of the other classes, but without them, the whole system would grind to a halt faster than a chariot with a busted wheel. Their contributions were vital, even if they didn't always get the recognition they deserved. Now, it's easy to look at this hierarchy and see it as a rigid, oppressive system. But here's the kicker. In its original form, it wasn't about power or privilege, but about function and order. It was designed to make sure that everyone had a role to play, and that the tribe as a whole could survive the harsh realities of the ancient world. It was less about who got to sit on the Iron Throne, and more about making sure everyone had a seat at the table, even if it was the kids' table. But before you start thinking this was some sort of egalitarian utopia, remember that ideals and reality often don't see eye to eye. Over time, as the Aryan tribes settled and their societies grew more complex, the hierarchy became more entrenched. The system that began as a way to maintain balance slowly morphed into one that maintained control. The Brahmins and Kshatriyas, once practical leaders and protectors, started to look a bit more like the ruling elite, ensuring the status quo worked in their favor. Not exactly the neighborhood watch we imagined. Economic context played a huge role in shaping this hierarchy. In a society where resources were often scarce and competition fierce, knowing your role meant the difference between prosperity and poverty. The Aryans understood that each caste's function was crucial for collective survival. Picture a medieval neighborhood where, instead of squabbling over parking spaces, they were negotiating for survival against the elements and rival tribes. This division of labor made the Aryan tribes resilient, allowing them to adapt and thrive in new environments. They weren't just conquering new lands, they were integrating, trading, and intermingling with the local populations, which often led to cultural exchanges that enriched both sides. The Aryans weren't just warriors and priests, they were cultural chameleons, blending their traditions with those of the people they encountered. And while the romantic notion of a harmonious society is appealing, the reality was often more complicated. Tensions between the different social roles were inevitable. The Brahmins and Kshatriyas, with their respective spiritual and military clout, sometimes found themselves at odds, each vying for influence over the tribe. Meanwhile, the Vaishyas and Shudras had to navigate a system that didn't always play fair, one that could easily tip from balanced to exploitative. Still, this complex social structure offered a certain stability in a world where the only constant was change. In many ways, the Aryan tribes were like a medieval startup, with each caste acting as a different department, all working towards the same goal, survival and success. Their social order was a finely tuned machine, one that could adapt to new challenges and opportunities, even if it occasionally needed a little oiling or a complete overhaul. So, while the Aryan social system might not have been the utopian vision of equality and cooperation, it was a pragmatic response to the challenges of their time. It was a society built on the understanding that everyone had a part to play, whether that meant wielding a sword, chanting a prayer, tilling a field, or crafting a tool. And despite its flaws, this intricate hierarchy was crucial in the Aryans' ability to navigate the ancient world, leaving a legacy that would echo through history long after their chariots had rolled into the sunset. Speaking of rolling into the sunset, let's talk about the economic engine that powered those Aryan chariots across the ancient landscape. The Aryan tribes were like the ultimate road-tripping entrepreneurs, setting up shop wherever they found fertile ground. But instead of selling artisanal cheese or vintage records, their market was all about agriculture and trade. Think of them as the OG farmers' market vendors, dealing in the essentials of life, grains, livestock, and the occasional luxury item to keep things spicy. Now, before we get all romantic about their trade routes and agricultural prowess, let's sprinkle in some reality. The Aryan economy was less about building a capitalist utopia and more about making sure everyone had enough to eat and drink. In a world where the next harvest could spell either feast or famine, survival was the name of the game. Forget stock market tickers and IPOs. These folks were all about the barter system. And guess what? Cows were the currency of choice. That's right. If you ever thought having cash cows was just a metaphor, think again. Let's break it down. The Aryans operated in a world where the concept of cold, hard cash didn't exist. Instead, they traded what they grew and raised. Imagine a marketplace where the going rate for a good horse was about 10 cows and a couple of goats. Need a new plough? That'll cost you a bushel of barley or maybe a few sheep if you're feeling generous. It was like haggling at a flea market, but instead of vintage lamps or vinyl, you were swapping livestock and grain. And speaking of grain, the Aryans took agriculture seriously. They weren't just planting seeds and hoping for the best, they had systems. When it came to crop rotation, these guys were the original sustainability gurus. They understood the importance of letting fields rest and rotate to keep the soil fertile. So, while they might not have had fancy tractors or GMOs, their farming techniques were pretty advanced for their time. They grew barley, wheat, and millet, with barley often playing the starring role. Why barley, you ask? Well, it was hardy enough to withstand the occasional climate tantrum that Mother Nature liked to throw their way. But let's not forget the livestock. The Aryans were cattle herders extraordinaire. Cows weren't just walking hamburgers. They were central to Aryan life. They provided milk, meat, and, perhaps most importantly, a measure of wealth and status. In Aryan society, owning a large herd was like having a hefty bank account. And when conflicts arose, it wasn't uncommon for rival tribes to raid each other's cattle, sparking what could be described as the ancient world's version of corporate takeovers. Now, while the whole barter system sounds quaint and charming, it had its downsides. For one, there was the issue of value. How do you decide if 3 sheep are worth the same as a cow? It was a constant negotiation requiring a keen understanding of supply and demand, a skill as valuable then as it is now. And while barter was the norm, as the Aryans settled and their societies grew, the seeds of a more formal economy began to sprout. The eventual introduction of coinage would revolutionize trade, but that's a tale for another time. Trade extended beyond just swapping goods within their own tribes. The Aryans were savvy traders, engaging in commerce with neighboring civilizations. They were like the ancient world's LinkedIn network, connecting distant cultures through trade routes that stretched from the Indus Valley to the fringes of Europe. And while they weren't dealing in stocks or bonds, they did trade in metals, textiles, and other valuables. This exchange was not just about goods, but also ideas, with trade routes facilitating the spread of technology, language, and culture. Interestingly, while we often think of trade as a peaceful endeavor, it wasn't always smooth sailing. Economic competition could turn fierce, with disputes over trade routes and resources sometimes leading to skirmishes. Yet, in the grand scheme of things, trade was a unifying force, creating interdependencies that helped stabilize relations between otherwise rival tribes. And let's not forget the role of innovation in their economic survival. The Aryans were ace metallurgists, crafting tools and weapons that were the envy of their neighbors. Their proficiency with iron and other metals wasn't just a byproduct of necessity, it was a strategic advantage. By creating superior tools, they could cultivate more land and produce more goods, boosting their economic resilience. But here's where the myth-busting comes in. While it's tempting to view the Aryans as idyllic, self-sufficient agrarians, the reality was more nuanced. Economic life was gritty and unpredictable, with variables like weather, pests, and warfare always lurking. Their economic strategies were less about amassing wealth and more about securing tomorrow's meal. In this sense, the Aryans were survivalists, constantly adapting to their environment and circumstances. So, while the romance of a barter-based society has its appeal, the realities were far more complex. The Aryans were navigating a world where economic stability was hard-won and always precarious. Their ability to adapt and innovate was crucial, allowing them to maintain a delicate balance between prosperity and survival. And, as their society evolved, so too did their economy, setting the stage for future developments that would reverberate through history. In the end, the Aryan tribes were like the original entrepreneurs, leveraging their resources, skills, and networks to carve out a living in a world that was anything but predictable. Their story isn't just about cows and crops, it's about resilience, adaptability, and the unyielding drive to thrive in the face of adversity. As we continue to unravel their legacy, it's clear that their economic strategies, while rooted in survival, laid the groundwork for more complex economic systems to come. And while the Aryans may have been the original road-tripping hipsters, their economic ingenuity truly underscores their role as pioneers of their time. So, stick around as we delve deeper into their story, exploring how these intrepid tribes navigated the challenges of their world and left a legacy that would echo through the ages. Because when it comes to the Aryans, there's always more to uncover, and we've only just begun. But hold your horses, because we're about to dive into the Aryans' greatest legacy, their religious and cultural contributions. Forget Instagram influencers with their perfectly curated feeds. These guys were the original social media stars, but instead of selfies and hashtags, they had hymns and rituals. The Vedic texts, their magnum opus, were like the ultimate content, setting the stage for what would eventually become Hinduism. Let's start with the Rig Veda, the oldest of the Vedic texts, which makes your dusty old yearbook look like a fleeting Snapchat. Composed around 1500 BCE, it's a collection of over 1,000 hymns dedicated to various deities. Think of it as an epic Spotify playlist, but instead of pop hits, it features odes to gods like Indra, Agni, and Varuna. These weren't just catchy tunes, they were the spiritual backbone of Aryan society. Now, before we get all misty-eyed about these sacred verses, let's unpack some of the gritty realities behind them. The Rig Veda was more than spiritual poetry. It was a strategic tool for maintaining social harmony and cosmic order. The Aryans believed in a concept called Ka, which was the cosmic law that governed everything, from the movement of stars to the outcome of battles. Maintaining Ekstrach was crucial, and the hymns were a way to invoke divine favor and keep the universe from spiraling into chaos. Forget your local weatherman, these hymns were the original forecast for cosmic weather. But here's the kicker. The Rig Veda wasn't just a religious text, it was also a historical document and a window into the Aryan worldview. Through its verses, we glimpse a society grappling with life's big questions: mortality, morality, and the meaning of existence. The Aryans used these hymns to navigate the complexities of life, much like how we scroll through inspirational quotes on social media to make sense of our chaotic world. The Aryans' pantheon was as diverse as a modern-day comic book universe, with each god and goddess playing a specific role. Indra, the king of gods, was like the ultimate superhero, wielding his thunderbolt to slay demons and ensure victory in battle. Agni, the fire god, acted as the messenger between humans and the divine, transporting offerings to the heavens during rituals. And Varuna, the god of water and cosmic order, kept the universe in check, like a divine referee blowing his whistle at the slightest hint of disorder. But let's not pretend it was all incense and enlightenment. The Aryans' religion also mirrored the harsh realities of their world. Sacrifices, both animal and sometimes human, were a grim reminder that the universe demanded a price for maintaining balance. The rituals were elaborate, often requiring precise recitations and offerings, which ensured that the priests, remember the Brahmins, held a significant amount of power. In this way, religion was as much about control as it was about communion with the divine. It was less kumbaya around the fire and more Game of Thrones with a spiritual twist. Economically speaking, these rituals were a boon for the Brahmins, who were essentially the ancient world's content creators. They had the exclusive rights to these spiritual practices, which meant they could dictate the terms of engagement with the gods. It was a lucrative gig, ensuring their status at the top of the social pyramid. Meanwhile, the rest of the tribe had to foot the bill, offering their labor, livestock, and crops to keep the cosmic wheels turning. Now, if you're wondering how all this translates into modern Hinduism, you're onto something. These early Vedic practices laid the groundwork for what would become a rich tapestry of beliefs and rituals. Over time, as the Aryans settled and mingled with local cultures, their religious practices evolved, incorporating new deities and philosophies. This cultural fusion eventually led to the Hinduism we recognize today, a complex, vibrant faith with roots deep in Aryan soil. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The transition from Vedic religion to Hinduism wasn't a straight line. It was more of a winding road filled with detours, debates, and divine revelations. As the Aryans spread across the Indian subcontinent, they encountered new ideas and challenges which forced them to adapt and evolve. This adaptability is what makes their story so compelling. They weren't just clinging to tradition, they were redefining it, one hymn at a time. And speaking of hymns, let's not forget the other Vedic texts, like the Samaveda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda, that rounded out their spiritual library. Each served a unique purpose, from guiding rituals to imparting practical wisdom. The Samaveda was like the Aryans' greatest hits album, setting the Rigvedic hymns to music for sacrificial ceremonies. Meanwhile, the Yajur Veda was the instruction manual, outlining the rituals step by step, ensuring everything was by the book, literally. The Atharva Veda, on the other hand, was the wild card. It delved into more esoteric realms, touching on magic spells, healing practices, and domestic issues. It's like the Aryans' version of a self-help book, offering guidance on everything from warding off evil spirits to curing ailments. The Atharva Veda reveals a society deeply concerned with the practicalities of life, blending the mystical with the mundane. In the grand tapestry of history, the Aryans were both architects and artisans, crafting a spiritual culture that would echo through the ages. Their hymns weren't just songs of praise, they were blueprints for a worldview that shaped civilizations. And while the romantic notion of a harmonious spiritual society is appealing, the reality was far more complex. The Aryans were navigating a world as unpredictable as it was awe-inspiring, using their rituals and beliefs to anchor themselves in the cosmic storm. So, as we wrap up this chapter, remember that the Aryans weren't just road-tripping hipsters with a knack for metallurgy and chariots. They were also the original influencers, whose spiritual and cultural innovations laid the foundation for a legacy that continues to resonate. And while we've only scratched the surface of their story, it's clear that their impact was as profound as it was enduring. Stay tuned, because the next leg of this journey will delve deeper into how these ancient wanderers continue to shape the world around them, leaving behind a trail of cultural and religious milestones that would stand the test of time. The Aryans might have been the original cosmic content creators, but their story is far from over. There's plenty more to explore, so hold on to your chariots as we continue this epic odyssey. And so, as the Aryans galloped their chariots further into the annals of history, they left behind more than just wheel ruts and echoes of Vedic chants. These nomadic tribes inadvertently crafted a legacy that would ripple across time and geography, shaping Indian culture in ways they could never have foreseen. But as we peel back the layers of their influence, we're also forced to confront how the Aryans became, much like any good internet meme, a symbol misappropriated by those with agendas as varied as the colors in a tie-dye shirt. Let's start with the obvious. The Aryan tribes were not the founding fathers of some superior race. This notion unfortunately gained traction in the 19th and 20th centuries, when certain political movements twisted the Aryan legacy for their own nefarious ends. The romanticized image of Aryans as a pure, noble lineage was about as historically accurate as claiming that unicorns were real and pranced through ancient pastures. In reality, the Aryans were a diverse group of tribes speaking a common language, leaving behind cultural footprints rather than genetic ones. But let's not toss out the baby with the bathwater. The Aryans did leave an indelible mark on Indian culture. particularly through the Vedic traditions. These nomads, with their penchant for hymns and rituals, laid the groundwork for what would become the rich tapestry of Hindu philosophy. The Vedas, with their mix of practical wisdom and cosmic musings, are still revered today, highlighting the Aryans' enduring influence. They were like ancient cultural influences whose viral content outlived the fleeting trends of their time. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the controversial aspect of Aryan identity that some modern politics still grapple with. The so-called Aryan invasion theory has been a hot potato in academic and political circles for decades. This theory posited that the Aryans swept into the Indian subcontinent, displacing the indigenous Dravidian cultures. While it made for a dramatic narrative, akin to a blockbuster movie plot, recent archaeological and genetic studies suggest a more nuanced story of migration and cultural exchange rather than outright conquest. Think of it as a complex dance of cultures rather than a winner-takes or gladiator match. Economically, the Aryans' legacy is just as fascinating. Their system of barter, trade, and agriculture laid the foundation for more sophisticated economic structures. The Aryans were early adopters of what we might call proto-globalization, engaging in trade that connected distant regions and facilitated cultural exchanges. Their influence extended beyond mere commerce. It was about ideas, technology, and cultural practices that would continue to evolve long after their chariots had rusted into oblivion. And speaking of evolution, the Aryan social structure, with its distinct varnas or classes, morphed into the caste system that would come to define much of Indian society. While the original varna system was more fluid and function-based, it calcified over time into a rigid hierarchy that has been both a source of social order and tension. This transformation underscores a broader truth about human societies. What starts as a pragmatic solution often solidifies into tradition, for better or worse. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality of life for the average Aryan was far from the idyllic pastoral scene some might imagine. Life was harsh, unpredictable, and often violent. The Aryans, like most ancient peoples, were survivalists, navigating a world where the next meal or battle could make or break them. They were masters of adaptation, blending their culture with those they encountered, leaving a legacy not of domination, but of fusion and innovation. As we wrap up this historical road trip, it's worth reflecting on the Aryans' unintended viral fame. They have been cast in roles they never auditioned for, from noble ancestors to racial archetypes. Yet their real story is far more compelling. A testament to human resilience, adaptability, and the relentless quest for meaning in a chaotic world. Their legacy is a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from countless journeys and stories, each thread carrying its unique colour and texture. And so, as we bid adieu to the Aryans and their epic chariots, let's carry forward the lessons of their journey. In a world where the past is often repurposed for modern narratives, it's crucial to dig beneath the surface and unearth the truths that lie buried in the sands of time. Because, much like the Aryans, we are all travellers on this vast, unpredictable road, leaving behind traces of our journeys for future generations to ponder and, inevitably, meme. The city's morning begins with a cacophony of sounds as you step into the dusty streets of 5th century BC Babylon. The air is a cocktail of aromas, from the earthy scent of clay bricks to the sweet tang of date palms. This isn't just any city. This is Babylon, the jewel of the ancient world, where over 200,000 souls hustle and bustle like ants in a frenetic colony. It's the largest metropolis of its time, a place so grand that Herodotus himself would sing its praises, assuming he hadn't exaggerated a tad, which, let's face it, is likely. But who can blame him when the allure of Babylon is as tempting as a basket of fresh pomegranates? As a Persian weaver, you're a cog in this vast machine, part of a tapestry as rich and complex as the ones you create. Let's unravel the threads of your day, starting with that glorious textile industry. It's a big deal around here. Babylon's economy practically runs on it. You see, textiles aren't just about looking good at the local ziggurat social gatherings. They're the lifeblood of trade, spanning from the dusty roads of Anatolia to the bustling ports of the Indus Valley. We're talking about an economic powerhouse that's as complex as a politician's promise, but way more reliable. Now, you might wonder why Persian weavers like you are in such high demand. Well, It's not just because you've got nimble fingers and an eye for color. Nope, there's a lot more to it. The Persians are renowned for their advanced techniques and vibrant dyes. Your work is basically the haute couture of the ancient world. Forget Paris. Babylon is where the fashion action is, with textiles that make the elite of Athens and Memphis drool with envy. Trade routes are alive with the chatter of merchants bargaining over bolts of your finest handiwork, each piece a passport to far-off lands. But before we get too carried away with the glamour, let's zoom in on those nitty-gritty details. The textile industry isn't just a parade of pretty patterns. It's about economic clout. Babylon's economy is a web of trade, and textiles are the silk threads that hold it together. The city thrives on its ability to export these goods, and in return, it imports everything from lapis lazuli to the latest philosophical musings from Greece because, let's face it, the Babylonians wouldn't want to miss out on Aristotle's latest hot take. Your morning begins in the weaving quarter, a place where Persian craftsmanship meets Babylonian ambition. It's a neighborhood that hums with the rhythmic clatter of looms, a symphony of productivity. Here, you'll find yourself surrounded by fellow artisans, all contributing to the city's insatiable demand for quality textiles. You're part of an elite group, the crème de la crème of weavers, and your skills are sought after like water in the desert. Your day's work doesn't just define your personal livelihood. It weaves into the fabric of the city's prosperity, literally and metaphorically. As you set up your loom, let's take a moment to admire Babylon's melting pot of cultures. The city was a magnet for different peoples, each bringing their own flair to the mix. You've got Jews, Arameans, Assyrians, and of course Persians like yourself, all coexisting in this vibrant tapestry of life. It's a diverse crowd that puts modern metropolises to shame, with a cultural exchange that makes today's globalization look like a quaint village fair. The economy here is as complex as one of your intricate patterns. It's not just about producing goods, it's about navigating the web of trade that spans continents. Your textiles are more than just commodities. They're symbols of cultural exchange, bridges between civilizations. They tell stories of distant lands and the people who inhabit them, while also serving as a reminder of Babylon's central role in this ancient network of commerce. And while we're on the topic of commerce, let's not forget the charm of the local marketplace. Picture a bustling bazaar, a sensory overload of colours, sounds and smells. It's where deals are struck, alliances are formed, and more than a few pockets are lined. The market is the heart of Babylon, a place where the pulse of the economy can be felt with every haggle and exchange. As a weaver, your work is the currency in this vibrant ecosystem, a testament to your skill and the city's commercial prowess. In this world, the power of the loom is undeniable. It's a tool of creation, a means of expression, and a symbol of economic might. Your day as a Persian weaver in Babylon is not just about crafting beautiful textiles. It's about shaping the very fabric of society, one thread at a time. As the sun rises higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the city, you can take pride in knowing that your work contributes to the legacy of a civilization that will echo through the annals of history. And while the sun continues to climb, let's take a closer look at what really goes on behind the scenes of your craft. Your day isn't just about artistic expression. It's a gritty tango with economics and politics, all woven into a piece of fabric that's more than just pretty to look at. First off, let's talk wool. It's the bread and butter of your industry, but don't let its fluffy demeanor fool you. This stuff doesn't come cheap. In 5th century BC Babylon, a single shekel could get you around 8 pounds of wool. Now, before you start thinking that's a steal, remember that a shekel was a pretty big deal. It's like dropping a day's wage on a single skein. This isn't just any wool either. We're talking about the soft stuff, the kind kings might wear, not the scratchy kind that makes you itch like you've rolled in nettles. So, every thread you weave is an investment, a gamble that your final product will fetch a price worthy of its materials. And then there's dye. Oh, the elusive, expensive, and let's face it, intoxicating world of dyes. You see, bright colours were the ancient world's version of a luxury sports car. Want to impress the neighbours? Sling on a robe dyed in Tyrian purple. But here's the kicker. The dye came from the murex snail, and it took about 12,000 of these little critters to produce just 1.4 grams of pure dye. That purple robe? It's like a status symbol on steroids. The labor involved in weaving doesn't just stop at gathering materials. Let's unpack the time it takes to actually produce something. Creating a simple cloth could take weeks, sometimes months, especially if you're going for one of those intricate patterns that make a Persian rug look like child's play. The loom becomes your best friend and worst enemy, a wooden beast that demands your attention like a needy cat. You spend hours threading warp and weft, a dance of patience and precision. Now, while you're hunched over that loom, let's talk politics. Because, believe it or not, the Achaemenid Empire has its fingerprints all over your loom. You might think you're just weaving a piece of cloth, but you're part of a much bigger picture. The empire, with its sprawling territories from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, is like a giant octopus with trade tentacles stretching in every direction. Babylon is smack in the middle of this ancient superhighway, and textiles are one of the main currencies. The empire's influence means that what you weave isn't just for local consumption. Your textiles could end up in the markets of Susa, or even as far away as Egypt. This grand scale of commerce is like the ancient version of going viral, and your handiwork is the meme of choice. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. The empire's demand for textiles is both a blessing and a burden. Sure, it means more business, but it also means more oversight, more taxes, and the constant pressure to meet the standards of far-off bureaucrats who wouldn't know a good weave from a bad hair day. Let's not forget how the empire's politics seep into your daily grind. The Achaemenids were all about control, and that meant keeping a tight rein on trade. They imposed tariffs and taxes that could make even the most seasoned merchant weep into their accounts ledger. This isn't some romantic tale of a weaver happily crafting away in a sunlit workshop. It's a high-stakes game where economic shifts can leave you penniless or prosperous in a heartbeat. And then there's the social angle. In this bustling metropolis, your status as a Persian weaver gives you a certain prestige. You're not just any craftsman, you're part of an elite group revered for their skills. But with great power comes great expectation. The pressure to innovate and keep up with fashion trends is real. Imagine having to constantly reinvent your style to stay relevant. It's like being a fashion designer in Milan, but with less espresso and more sand. So, as you weave through your day, it's not just the threads that are complex. Your life is a tapestry of economic, political, and social strands. Each decision, each purchase of wool and dye, each interaction with a merchant is a thread in this elaborate fabric. The world you live in is vibrant and dynamic, much like the patterns you create, and your role in it is as intricate as the finest Persian textile. Let's leave the loom for a moment, though, because there's still so much more to unravel in this grand tapestry of history. And so, you step away from the loom, leaving behind the rhythmic clatter that's as familiar as your own heartbeat. It's time to venture into the bustling markets of Babylon, a scene that's a feast for the senses and a playground for any history buff with a taste for the eclectic. Think of it as a cultural kaleidoscope with a soundtrack of haggling voices, clinking coins, and the distant melody of a flute player trying to earn his daily bread. As you stroll through the streets, you can practically taste the cosmopolitan vibe in the air. This isn't just any market. It's a microcosm of the ancient world. A place where Egyptian merchants might be arguing the finer points of linen quality with a Greek trader who's more interested in securing the best deal on olive oil. Here, everyone's got a story. And if you listen closely, you might just catch a tale or two about distant lands that sound more like fables than fact. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Babylon's market isn't all about exotic allure and cultural exchanges. It's also a stark reminder of the economic disparities that make life in this grand city a bit of a roller coaster. Sure, we've all heard the tales of Babylon's opulence, the hanging gardens, anyone? But while some folks might be lounging in luxury, soaking in their private baths of aromatic oils, the reality for many is a bit grimmer. Most of the working class, including your fellow weavers, are grinding away just to make ends meet. It's a world where the gap between the haves and the have-nots is as wide as the Euphrates. Speaking of wealth, let's talk textiles again. They're the stock market of ancient Babylon, and the market floor is right here in these bustling stalls. Textiles aren't just about keeping the cold out, they're a currency of sorts, traded and bartered. Their value is fluid as the Tigris. The Persian fabrics you produce are particularly sought after, often considered the Neiman Marcus of the ancient world. But here's a plot twist. While your textiles might fetch a pretty penny abroad, locally, the market's got its own set of rules. Prices can fluctuate wildly, influenced by everything from the latest military campaign to the whims of a merchant who's had one too many cups of barley beer. And what about those merchants? They're not just peddling goods, they're the original diplomats, playing a high-stakes game of international relations with every trade deal. These folks have to be as savvy as politicians, juggling the interests of different cultures while keeping an eye on their bottom line. It's a delicate dance, and one misstep could mean the difference between striking a deal or striking out. You see, in Babylon, a merchant's role is as multifaceted as a cut gemstone, and their success often hinges on their ability to navigate the treacherous waters of ancient geopolitics. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life for the average Babylonian, especially those in the working class, wasn't a grand tapestry of endless opportunity. The reality was more like a patchwork quilt, with some patches decidedly more threadbare than others. The city might be the epicenter of an empire, but for many it's a constant balancing act of survival. Wages are low, taxes are high, and the cost of living can make you feel like you're trying to fill a bottomless pit with a teaspoon. And then there's the myth of the Babylonian lifestyle. Lavish feasts, opulent architecture, and decadence that would make a Roman emperor blush. Sure, for the elite it might have been a never-ending party, but for the majority it was more about bread and barley than banquets and bacchanals. The rich might have been sipping wine from gold goblets, but the average Joe was more likely to be nursing a mug of watered-down beer. As you wander through the market, your senses are bombarded with the sights and sounds of this ancient metropolis in full swing. The scent of spices, cumin, coriander, and cinnamon mingles with the dusty air, creating an aroma that's both exotic and familiar. Vendors shout out their wares, their voices competing with the cacophony of bleating goats and chattering customers. It's a sensory overload that's as thrilling as it is overwhelming, a testament to the vibrant chaos that defines Babylon. And amidst this chaos, you'll find a variety of cultures rubbing shoulders, each adding their own flavor to the mix. Egyptians with their papyrus and perfumes, Greeks with their olives and philosophical musings, and of course the locals, who keep the whole machine running. It's a melting pot that makes today's global cities look like a provincial town meeting. But don't get too lost in the romance of it all. Babylon might look like a beacon of diversity, but beneath the surface, tensions simmer. The different cultures don't always mix as smoothly as the spices in a well-cooked stew. There's competition, rivalry, and the ever-present risk of conflict, both cultural and economic. It's a reminder that while the market might be a place of exchange, it's also a battleground where survival often trumps camaraderie. So as you make your way through the market, remember that Babylon is a city of contradictions. It's a place where the past meets the future, where the splendor of empire collides with the struggles of everyday life. It's a city that captivates the imagination, but it's also one that demands a closer look. A place where myth and reality intertwine like the threads on your loom. As the afternoon sun casts long shadows over the bustling streets, you realize that in Babylon, every day is a new chapter in a story that's as intricate as the textiles you weave. And while the market is just one part of that story, it's a part that reveals the heart of a city that, for all its ancient allure, is as complex and dynamic as any modern metropolis. You step back through the bustling marketplace, weaving your way, pun fully intended, through the throng of Babylon's eclectic mix, heading back to the familiar clatter of looms. Let's dive into the social fabric of your world, which is as tangled and full of knots as the threads you work with. Weaving, it turns out, is one of the few professions where women could make their mark in this man's world. That's right, ladies. This was your domain long before glass ceilings were a thing to break. In ancient Babylon, the loom is more than a tool, it's a social equalizer. While most professions are locked behind the iron gates of gender, weaving provides a loophole. Here, women aren't just participants, they're power players. Imagine the scene, women from all walks of life. Wives, widows, daughters, sitting side by side, their hands a blur of motion, their voices a murmur of shared stories and gossip. It's less of a sweatshop, more of a social club with a productivity clause. Now, let's shatter a myth or two. The romantic notion that these women were spinning tales while spinning yarn? Not so much. Weaving was hard, physical labor, the kind that left your back aching and your fingers calloused. But it was also one of the few ways for women to earn an independent income. Forget the fairy tale of the damsel in distress. These women are the heroines of their own stories, balancing the loom and family life like seasoned acrobats. And while we're on the topic of balance, let's talk about social status. In the grand tapestry of Babylon society, weavers occupied a peculiar niche. They were artisans, skilled workers whose craft was essential to the city's economy. Yet, unlike the merchants who strutted through the market with a swagger in their step, weavers were more like the unsung heroes of the textile world. They didn't just produce goods, they created culture, fashioning the very fabric of Babylonian identity, one thread at a time. Navigating this social hierarchy was like playing a game of snakes and ladders. You could rise in status with a particularly stunning piece of work, or find yourself sliding down if your dyes were less vibrant than promised. It was a constant hustle, a dance with destiny where each move could elevate you to new heights or leave you tangled in societal expectations. Now, let's unravel the mystery of guilds and apprenticeships. Guilds were like the ancient world's version of LinkedIn, minus the endless endorsements and unsolicited messages. These were tight-knit communities where skills were passed down like treasured heirlooms. Joining a guild was like earning a badge of honor. It meant you were recognized, part of an elite circle where knowledge was currency. The guild set the standards, controlled prices, and even influenced fashion trends. Talk about a power trip. Apprenticeships, on the other hand, were the boot camps of the weaving world. Youngsters, often from modest backgrounds, would spend years learning the craft. It was an investment in the future, a ticket to economic independence and social mobility. They'd start with the basics, learning to warp and weft, eventually graduating to more complex patterns and dyeing techniques. It was a rite of passage, a transformation from novice to master, where each mistake was a lesson and each success a stepping stone. But let's not romanticize it too much. The road to mastery was paved with sweat, frustration, and the occasional disaster. Imagine spending weeks on a piece only to have it ruined by a careless slip or a botched dye job. It was a test of patience, resilience, and, sometimes, one's ability to creatively curse in Aramaic. In the grand scheme of things, these guilds and apprenticeships did more than just create skilled weavers. They fostered a sense of community, a network of support that stretched across the city like an invisible web. In a world where the whims of fortune could change overnight, having a safety net was as precious as the finest silk. And here's another nugget to chew on. Weaving wasn't just a job, it was a cultural exchange program. As a weaver, you'd find yourself incorporating techniques and patterns from across the empire. Persian, Assyrian, and even Egyptian influences wove their way into your work, creating a tapestry of diversity that mirrored the city's cosmopolitan spirit. So as you return to your loom, remember that each thread you weave is more than just a strand of wool or linen. It's a link in a chain of history, a connection to countless others who've sat at a loom before you, each adding their own unique color to the tapestry of time. In this world, your work is more than just a job, it's a legacy. And as the sun sets over the city, casting long shadows across the bustling streets, you settle into the rhythm of the loom, knowing that with each pass of the shuttle, you're weaving more than just fabric. You're weaving the story of Babylon itself. As the loom's rhythm becomes your evening soundtrack, it's time to zoom out and appreciate the broader tapestry your work is part of. These textiles you're weaving, they're not just collecting dust in some Babylonian closet. Nope, they're the ancient world's version of an Instagram influencer, traveling far and wide, spreading style and setting trends. From the sun-baked roads of Anatolia to the bustling docks of the Indus Valley, your handiwork is making waves, and not the kind you'd find at a pool party. Let's talk about the logistics of this ancient fashion show. Your textiles get bundled up and loaded onto camel caravans, those ships of the desert, carrying your craft across vast distances. Picture this, a typical journey could take weeks or even months, depending on the destination. It's like waiting for a package delivery that's stuck in a time loop. But the payoff? Worth it. Babylonian textiles were high in demand, not just for their beauty, but for the status they conferred. Wearing a piece of Babylonian fabric was like flashing a designer label, instant credibility, ancient style. And these fabrics weren't just about looking good. They told stories, whispered secrets of cultures mingling and civilizations trading ideas as well as goods. Picture an Athenian nobleman draped in your rich Persian dye, or an Egyptian official admiring the intricacy of your patterns. Your work was a passport, a meeting point for cultures that might otherwise see each other only over the tips of spears. It was diplomacy woven into fabric, a silent ambassador that spoke volumes in an era without Instagram captions. But let's peel back the romantic veneer. The reality of life as a weaver wasn't exactly a cozy fireside tale. Sure, your products travelled, but you, stuck in the workshop, back hunched over the loom, muscles aching from the relentless grind. It's the classic story of the artist whose work gets more air miles than they do. And let's not gloss over the economics. Your earnings didn't always reflect the far-reaching influence of your labour. In a world where the elite hogged the limelight, weavers were often the unsung heroes, the anonymous artists behind the masterpieces. Speaking of influence, let's dive into the legacy of your craft. The techniques you're using today? They've got staying power. We're talking centuries of influence, a ripple effect that stretches from the Achaemenid Empire to medieval Europe and beyond. Persian weaving techniques were passed down like family heirlooms, cherished and adapted by each generation. They became the foundation for what we now consider classical textile design. That's right. Your daily grind helped lay the groundwork for future fashion icons, long before the likes of Coco Chanel and Yves Saint Laurent strutted onto the scene. And let's not forget the resilience required to keep this legacy alive. In a world where the next invasion or economic downturn could unravel your livelihood faster than a loose thread, adaptability was key. Your ancestors learned to pivot faster than a politician caught in a scandal. They experimented with new dyes, innovated with patterns, and found ways to keep the craft relevant despite the ever-changing tides of history. Now, about those romanticized narratives of ancient life, let's give them a reality check. Babylon might shimmer in the history books, but living there wasn't all glitter and glory. It was a bustling metropolis, sure, but also a place where the divide between rich and poor was as wide as the Euphrates. The idyllic image of artisans working joyfully under the Mesopotamian sun? A bit of a stretch. It was hard work, a constant hustle to stay afloat in a city where fortunes could change as swiftly as the currents of the river that defined its landscape. The resilience required to thrive in this vibrant yet challenging world was nothing short of epic. It's easy to romanticize the past, but the reality was gritty. Babylon's true beauty lay in its complexity, in the way it brought together diverse peoples and ideas, all woven into a city that was as flawed as it was fascinating. And as the sun sets over this ancient tapestry, casting long shadows through the weaving quarter, you realize that your role in this story is both small and significant. As you pack up your tools and prepare to leave the workshop, there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing that your work isn't just another thread in the fabric of history. It's a testament to the enduring power of creativity and resilience. Each piece you've woven is a fragment of a larger narrative, a story that echoes through the ages, challenging the myths and celebrating the realities of a world that, for all its ancient allure, is as complex and dynamic as our own. So, as you step out into the cooling evening air, remember that while the romantic tales of Babylon might capture our imaginations, it's the grit and perseverance of those who lived it that truly inspire. Whether your textiles end up in a far-off market or worn by a local elite, they carry with them the essence of a civilization that, for all its contradictions, remains one of history's most captivating chapters. And as you make your way home, the city humming with life around you, you can rest assured that your contribution to this ancient world is as lasting as the textiles you've so skillfully crafted. It's the crack of dawn in ancient Rome, and the city is already buzzing like a beehive on espresso. Smoke from incense spirals lazily into the sky, and the scent of fresh garlands mingles with the unmistakable aroma of, well, let's just say the hygiene standards of the time left something to be desired. But that's not what today's about. Today, we're diving headfirst into the Roman way of keeping the gods on their side, because messing with them was a bit like trying to take a selfie with a lion. Into the world of Roman rituals, where religion wasn't just a matter of faith, but a full-blown quid pro quo affair. First up in our star-studded ancient lineup is the concept of do ut des, a Latin phrase that basically translates to, I give so you might give. This wasn't just a catchy slogan, it was the backbone of Roman religious practices. a transactional relationship with the divine that would make any Wall Street broker proud. The Romans believed their gods needed regular feeding, both metaphorically and literally, through sacrifices and offerings. Miss a payment and you could kiss your next harvest or battle victory goodbye. It's like the ultimate heavenly subscription service. Forget to renew, and you're out of divine Wi-Fi. Now, you might think this sounds a tad mercenary, but in a city where politics was blood sport and fortunes turned on a sestertius, it made perfect sense. The Romans were nothing if not practical, and they had a god for just about everything. Jupiter for the sky, Neptune for the sea, and even Cloacina, goddess of the sewer system. Yes, you heard that right. The Romans knew that without a functioning sewer system, the city would quickly become unlivable, so why not have a deity to keep it running smoothly? These divine relationships were cemented in some pretty spectacular ceremonies. Take the festival of Saturnalia, for example, originally a one-day affair that stretched into a week-long extravaganza by the late Republic. It was a time when social norms were turned on their heads, slaves dined with masters, gambling was allowed, and everyone wore their best party togas. It's the kind of celebration that makes modern office holiday parties look like a quiet night in. Speaking of parties, let's talk about the economic engine driving this divine machine. Maintaining temples was no small feat. The Temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, perched on the Capitoline Hill, wasn't just a place of worship, it was an architectural marvel and a financial black hole. The original temple reportedly cost 15,000 talents to construct, a sum that would make even the most extravagant modern megachurch blush. And it wasn't just the building. Staffing these places required a small army of priests, augurs, and vestals, all of whom needed to be kept in the style to which they were accustomed. But why such lavish spending on gods in their earthly homes? Well, part of it was about showing off. In a society where public image was everything, sponsoring a temple or festival was a great way to earn clout. Senators and emperors alike would outdo each other in acts of piety, which conveniently also served as acts of political propaganda. Build a bigger temple, and you didn't just please the gods, you secured your legacy. Now, before we get too romantic about the grandeur of it all, let's throw some cold water on that fire. The Roman gods, colourful as they were, had a hierarchy that mirrored the social structures of the time. Jupiter, the king of gods, ruled with an iron sceptre from the top, with his wife Juno not far behind. But this divine pecking order also reinforced earthly inequalities. Much like Roman society, where not everyone was equal, the gods had their own internal politics and rivalries. Sound familiar? One of the more entertaining aspects of Roman religion was the divine soap opera that unfolded in myth and ritual. Jupiter, for instance, was notorious for his amorous escapades, which often left the divine family tree looking more like a tangled vine. His pursuits led to numerous offspring and not a little scandal among the divine set. Meanwhile, the goddess Minerva was seen as the embodiment of wisdom and strategic warfare, making her a favourite among generals and scholars alike. Debunking the myths of Roman religion isn't about stripping away its magic, but understanding that it was a deeply human affair. These rituals and beliefs were woven into the very fabric of Roman life, dictating everything from daily routines to grand political manoeuvres. The gods were omnipresent, their favour courted with the same fervour as a modern-day influencer seeking likes and shares. So, as the sun sets on this first foray into Roman ritual, remember that these practices were as much about the Romans themselves as they were about their gods. It was a world where the divine and the mundane danced a complex tango, each step carefully choreographed to keep the universe in balance. And while we might laugh at the idea of a god of sewers, it's a reminder that, in the end, the Romans worshipped what they knew, what they needed, and what they feared. And that, my friends, is a ritual as old as time itself. If you thought the Romans were just about quiet reverence and incense wafting through temple columns, think again. Let's crank up the volume to gladiatorial contests and public games, where the clash of swords was as common as a modern traffic jam. Welcome to the Colosseum, Rome's own Thunderdome, where the spectacles were as grandiose as they were brutal. Think of it as the Super Bowl, minus the halftime show, and with a lot more blood. The Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheatre if you're on formal terms, was the epicentre of Rome's entertainment universe. With a capacity to seat roughly 50,000 spectators, This architectural marvel was the largest amphitheatre ever built. And it was free. Yes, you heard that right. Entry was on the house, thanks to emperors who picked up the tab as a way to curry favour with the masses. After all, nothing says, "Vote for me," quite like a weekend of lions versus gladiators, with a side of chariot racing. But let's talk numbers, because these events weren't just about cheap thrills. They were a logistical nightmare and an economic black hole. The inaugural games, hosted by Emperor Titus in 80 AD, lasted a whopping 100 days, featuring 9,000 animals and 2,000 gladiators. The cost? Well, let's just say it was enough to make a modern Olympic budget look thrifty. Some estimates suggest that a single day's events could cost the equivalent of millions of dollars today. Behind the scenes, the Roman games were a finely tuned machine. Animals were imported from across the empire, elephants from Africa, tigers from India, and bears from the forests of Europe. The logistics of transporting these beasts were Herculean, and the Romans didn't have the luxury of FedEx. Add in the costs of feeding, housing, and training the gladiators, who were often slaves or prisoners of war, and you've got an operation that would make a startup founder sweat. The games weren't just about gore and glory, they were a political chessboard where emperors and senators could flex their muscles. Sponsoring these events was a way to demonstrate power and generosity. It was also a handy distraction from less savoury matters like political corruption or famine. Bread and circuses, as the poet Juvenal famously put it, were the tools of statecraft. Keep the bellies full and the spectacles spectacular, and the populace might just overlook your latest tax hike. Now, let's address the elephant, or rather, the lion in the room. Did the Romans actually enjoy these bloodbaths, or were they just putting on a brave face? Historical accounts suggest a mix of genuine excitement and social obligation. Crowds would cheer and jeer with the fervour of a modern-day sports fan, but like any fad, there were probably some who just went along for the ride. It's like pretending to enjoy interpretive dance at a friend's art opening. You're there for the free wine and to be seen. Gladiators themselves were a mix of celebrities and expendables. Successful fighters could achieve rock star status, with fans and even wealthy patrons who might sponsor their careers. Winning a bout could mean a hefty purse, and for some the ultimate prize, freedom. But let's not romanticize it too much. Many never lived to see their 50th fight. In fact, the mortality rate for gladiators is estimated to have been around 20% per match. Not exactly odds you'd bet your life on, unless you had no choice. Debunking the myth of the noble gladiator isn't to strip away their allure, but to understand their reality. They were the working class of the arena, part of a spectacle machine that churned out entertainment at a cost. But in a society that revered martial prowess and divine favour, their battles were a microcosm of Roman values, courage, strength, and the capricious winds of fate. The Colosseum itself, though a marvel of engineering, was a symbol of excess and ambition. Constructed in under a decade, it was a testament to Roman ingenuity and, let's be honest, a bit of an ego trip for the Flavian dynasty. As an enduring icon, it's a paradox. A ruin that tells the story of grandeur and decay, a monument to human achievement and the cost of entertainment. And so, as we peer through the dust of history at these grand spectacles, we see a civilization that lived large, loved fiercely, and sometimes fought brutally. The games were a reflection of Rome itself, a world of contradictions where life and death danced on the edge of a sword. As we move forward in our exploration of Roman rituals, remember that these spectacles were more than mere entertainment. They were a mirror to the soul of an empire, reflecting its might and its madness. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in the shadow of the Colosseum. As we leave behind the roar of the Colosseum, let's take a quieter step into the Roman household, where the drama was less about bloodshed and more about keeping the gods happy enough not to turn your house into a smouldering ruin. Welcome to the world of private rituals and domestic worship, where the stakes were just as high, but the audience was a lot more intimate. If you thought the Romans only worshipped in grand temples, think again. The real spiritual action often took place at home, right under the noses of household gods known as Lares and Penates. These deities were less about grand gestures and more about the everyday. Think of them as the divine equivalent of a family heirloom, passed down through generations to keep things steady and predictable. Every Roman household had its own shrine, the lararium, a mini temple usually tucked away in a corner, where offerings of food, wine, and incense were regularly made to keep these gods content. Let's debunk a myth right off the bat. These household rituals were not the quaint, charming affairs they're often made out to be. They were serious business, a daily grind to maintain favour and avoid misfortune. You might offer a bit of your breakfast bread or some wine from last night's dinner, and in return the lares and penates would, hopefully, ensure that your roof didn't cave in and that your children didn't turn into juvenile delinquents. Because in Roman times, as now, family was a delicate ecosystem held together by sheer will and a bit of divine intervention. Now, let's talk about the social roles involved in these domestic rituals. While the public sphere of Roman religion was dominated by priests and emperors, the private sphere was largely the domain of women. The matron of the household was often the one leading these rituals, lighting the incense and muttering the prayers. And before you start romanticizing this as a sign of gender equality, let's put it in context, women were expected to manage the home, so handling the household gods was just another item on their pre-modern to-do list, right alongside weaving and managing the slaves. It's like being handed the remote control to the universe, but only to change the channel on your own TV. The irony here is as thick as a Roman stew. In a society that often sidelined women in public affairs, they held significant power in the domestic spiritual realm. This private religious practice reinforced social norms by subtly underlining a woman's role as a caretaker of both her family and the gods. So while women couldn't vote or hold office, they were entrusted with the cosmic equivalent of a key to the family's fortunes. It's a bit like being given the responsibility for a nation's nuclear codes, but only being allowed to use them to heat up dinner. And what did the men think of this domestic arrangement? Well, Roman men were pragmatic enough to appreciate any edge they could get, divine or otherwise. They may have been strutting their stuff in the forum, but they knew that a happy household goddess meant fewer headaches at home. After all, the last thing you want when you're trying to outmaneuver a political rival is to come home to find that the lares have decided to go on strike because someone forgot their daily offering. Now, these private rituals weren't just about keeping the peace at home, they were also a reflection of broader Roman values. They emphasized stability, continuity, and the importance of tradition. The idea was that by maintaining these age-old practices, you were doing your part to uphold the social order. It's a bit like insisting on a family dinner every Sunday, except with more incense and less chance of an argument over who forgot to bring the salad. The lares and penates were more than just spiritual security blankets. They were cultural anchors in a world that was constantly shifting. As the Roman Empire expanded, absorbing new lands and peoples, the household gods remained a constant, a reminder of where Romans came from and what they stood for. It's not unlike holding on to your grandmother's china set while the world outside your door is going digital. But let's not get too misty-eyed about these practices. Like any tradition, they had their fair share of quirks and contradictions. For one, the distinction between the lares and penates was sometimes as clear as mud. The lares were often seen as protective spirits of the household, while the penates were more associated with the pantry and food. It's like having one god for home security and another for ensuring your fridge doesn't mysteriously empty overnight. As for the offerings themselves, they were a fascinating blend of the sacred and the mundane. Bread, wine, fruit, and incense were common, but so too were more practical items like salt. A valuable commodity in its own right. It's a potent reminder that while the Romans were busy appeasing their gods, they were also acutely aware of the economic realities of life. No point in offering something you couldn't afford to replace, after all. So as we peel back the layers of Roman domestic worship, we see a complex tapestry of belief, tradition, and practicality. It was a world where the divine was woven into the fabric of daily life, where the gods were both distant and intimately close. In many ways, it's not so different from our own time, where ancient family values and modern realities continue to dance an intricate tango, each step a testament to the enduring power of tradition in a world that never stops changing. Hold on to your laurel wreaths, because next time we'll dig deeper into the social norms that these rituals reinforced and how they kept the Roman world spinning on its axis. It's a tale of power, tradition, and the occasional divine intervention, so stay tuned. There's plenty more history where that came from, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. As we peel back the layers of Roman domestic worship, let's shift our gaze to the public rituals that often get romanticized into a haze of incense and marble. The reality, much like trying to find an honest politician, was far more complex and gritty. So let's roll up our sleeves and dive into the myths that have turned Roman rituals into something they never quite were. First up, let's talk about sacrifices. The word might conjure images of pristine altars and willing lambs, but the truth was more like a scene from a particularly chaotic farmyard. Sacrifices were the Roman way of saying, "Hey gods, don't smite us," with a side of, "Please grant us a bumper crop." Animals, cows, pigs, sheep were the stars of this show, and they didn't exactly volunteer for the role. This wasn't a gentle affair. It was messy, bloody, and loud. Imagine a modern barbecue gone terribly wrong. And for the record, a cow in ancient Rome cost about 100 denarii. A serious investment considering a soldier's annual salary was around 900 denarii. So when they did sacrifice, they meant business. The process was as meticulous as it was gruesome. Priests would inspect the entrails of the sacrificed animals, a practice known as haruspicy, to divine the will of the gods. You might wonder why anyone would choose to read the future from a cow's liver, but hey, it was a living. The Romans believed that the gods communicated with them through these visceral signs, which sounds like an elaborate excuse to avoid a bad decision. Sorry, can't go to war today. Jupiter's liver says no. It was like reading tea leaves, only with significantly more cleanup involved. Now, let's debunk the myth of the noble priesthood. The priests and priestesses of Rome were often more entangled in politics than in piety. Think of them as the original spin doctors, capable of interpreting the god's will with the same flexibility as a yoga instructor. If a priest wanted to sway public opinion or nudge a political agenda, a favorable prophecy could be just the ticket. And if the gods weren't on board, well, there was always room for creative reinterpretation. Priesthoods, like political offices, were often inherited or bought. The title of Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest, was one of the most powerful positions in Rome, and often held by leading politicians, including Julius Caesar himself. It was less about spiritual devotion and more about wielding influence. At its core, religion in Rome was like a game of chess, with the gods as pieces moved strategically to maintain power. Does that sound cynical? Maybe. But in a society where the line between divine favor and political maneuvering was blurrier than a late-night toga party, it was just business as usual. Then there's the practice of augury, the art of interpreting the will of the gods by observing birds, Rome's avian fortune-tellers. Augurs, the priests responsible for this, could make or break a career faster than a viral tweet. Before any major decision wars, elections, public works, the augurs would scan the skies. If the birds flew right, it was a thumbs up from the gods. If left, well, it was time to rethink your life choices. It might sound bonkers, but it was a system they trusted, a divine traffic light guiding Rome's destiny. Just imagine if today's stock market depended on the flight path of a pigeon. But let's not get too carried away with the absurdity without appreciating the genius. These rituals, as bizarre as they seem, were part of a complex system that kept order in a world teetering on chaos. They provided a sense of control and continuity, a way to make sense of the unpredictable. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, knew that rituals were as much about the spectacle as they were about divine intervention. And speaking of spectacle, let's not forget the economic engine behind all this divine theatre. Maintaining the priesthoods, funding sacrifices, and hosting elaborate ceremonies required deep pockets. The state often footed the bill, but ambitious individuals seeking political clout would also sponsor events, turning religious observance into a public display of wealth. It was a bit like buying out a stadium for a concert and inviting half the city to watch. The bigger the spectacle, the bigger the impression, and in a city where reputation was everything, that mattered. As we scrutinize these myths and legends, it becomes clear that Roman rituals were as much about human nature as they were about the divine. They were a reflection of a society that understood the power of belief, both as a personal comfort and a public tool. In debunking the romanticized narratives, we find a culture that was deeply pragmatic, using its gods as much for maintaining order and control as for seeking blessings and fortune. So as we leave the sacrifices and auguries behind, remember that the Roman world was one where the sacred and the profane walked hand in hand, where the divine was as much a part of the political landscape as it was the spiritual one. And as we prepare to dive deeper into the remaining layers of Roman ritual practice, we'll see just how these ancient traditions have left their mark on history, shaping not just an empire, but the very foundations of Western civilization. Stay tuned, because the story of Rome is far from over, and there are still plenty of gods, myths, and realities left to explore. While the Roman world was busy weaving its intricate tapestry of gods and rituals, it unwittingly set the stage for a legacy that would echo through the halls of history. You see, the Romans were the original brand strategists, and like any good campaign, their influence stuck around long after the last temple incense had burned out. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Roman rituals' lasting impact, from calendar quirks to superstitions that still make us knock on wood. First off, let's talk about the Roman calendar, an innovation that's more enduring than a bad tattoo. When Julius Caesar rolled out the Julian calendar in 46 BC, it was like the iPhone launch of its day. This new system, with its 365-day year and leap year every 4 years, was designed to bring order to the chaos of lunar months and seasonal drift. It was a much-needed fix, considering the old Roman calendar was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. And while the Gregorian calendar eventually replaced it in 1582, Julian's legacy lives on in the way we still count our days. So next time you're complaining about February having 28 days, thank or curse Julius. Then there are the names of the months, each a nod to Roman gods and emperors. July and August, named after Julius Caesar and Augustus respectively, are a testament to the Romans' knack for self-promotion. Meanwhile, March, named for Mars, the god of war, reminds us of a time when military campaigns kicked off with clockwork precision. And let's not forget the influence of Roman festivals, like Saturnalia, which many historians believe inspired some of our modern holiday traditions. The next time you're donning a paper crown at a Christmas party, remember you're channeling a bit of Roman revelry. Now, let's shift gears to superstitions. Romans were a superstitious bunch, and some of their beliefs have trickled down through the centuries like an old family recipe. Take the evil eye, for instance. Romans believed it could bring misfortune and went to great lengths to ward it off, often with phallic amulets. Fast forward to today, and you'll find the concept alive and kicking in many cultures across the globe, albeit with less phallic symbolism. Similarly, the idea of knocking on wood to avoid tempting fate can be traced back to Roman practices of touching sacred trees to invoke the god's protection. It's a small world, after all, when a habit of ancient legionnaires translates to your office colleagues' pre-meeting rituals. But perhaps the most intriguing inheritance is our modern-day love for spectacle, a legacy of Roman public entertainment. The Romans were the original masters of the grand gesture, and their penchant for theatricality has seeped into everything from sports to politics. Gladiatorial games may have faded into history, but the concept of engaging the masses with epic displays lives on. Think of the Olympics or the Super Bowl grand events where the stakes are high, the crowds are roaring, and athletes are celebrated like demigods. It's as if we've replaced the roar of the Colosseum with the buzz of social media. But the essence remains the same. A society captivated by the thrill of competition and the allure of heroes. And let's not forget the political pageantry that continues to echo Roman rituals. The Romans knew that public displays were not just for the gods but for the people. Political rallies, state funerals, and even royal weddings carry on this tradition, where the spectacle is as much about reinforcing power as it is about celebration. It's a bit like reading between the lines of a dossier magazine spread. The surface may glimmer, but there's always a strategic narrative at play. As we reckon with this legacy, it's worth pondering if we've really changed all that much. Sure, our altars might now be digital, and our sacrifices more symbolic than sanguine, but the human desire for connection, control, and continuity remains. We still seek meaning in rituals, whether they're rooted in ancient tradition or born from modern innovation. Our smartphones may have replaced the augur's staff, but we're still looking for signs, albeit in the form of notifications and news feeds. In wrapping up our Roman ritual road trip, it's clear that while the specifics may have shifted, the core remains a deep human need to make sense of the world and our place in it. The Romans, with their gods and games, understood this in their bones, and in their legacy we find echoes of our own struggles and triumphs. A reminder that while the stage may change, the play remains the same. So, as you ponder the quirks of history, remember that the rituals of the past are never too far from the rhythms of the present. And that, my friends, is a tale as timeless as Rome itself. In the grand theatre of human history, few roles are as iconic as that of the pharaoh of ancient Egypt. Picture this, a heady blend of divine right and absolute power, wrapped in linen and gold, striding through palaces and temples like a rock star with an entourage of devoted followers. The pharaohs were the original influences, their faces immortalized in colossal statues and on the walls of tombs that outlasted kingdoms. But before we get carried away on a chariot of romantic notions, let's dig into the gritty details of their rule. The good, the bad, and the surprisingly pragmatic. First off, the pharaohs weren't just rulers, they were gods on earth, or at least that's what they wanted everyone to believe. This was the ultimate PR campaign, crafted with the precision of the pyramid's angles. From the moment they donned the double crown, pharaohs were considered the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god, and upon death they became Osiris, the god of the afterlife. This clever marketing move kept them at the top of the social pyramid, both figuratively and literally. It's like having a lifetime contract with a deity endorsement deal, ensuring loyalty and compliance from their subjects under the guise of divine will. These divine monarchs were the masterminds behind some of the most ambitious construction projects known to man, most famously the pyramids. And let's not sugarcoat it. These weren't just upscale tombs, they were colossal symbols of power, engineered to endure for millennia. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, originally stood at about 146.6 feet tall and required an estimated 2.3 million blocks of stone. That's right, roughly 2.5 tons per block, each hauled by human muscle and ingenuity. Forget about modern-day skyscrapers. This was the ancient world's version of flexing on a cosmic scale. Now, let's talk economics. It's easy to get swept up in the grandeur, but constructing these monuments was no small feat for the Egyptian economy. Maintaining the workforce, estimated to be between 20,000 to 30,000 laborers for the Great Pyramid, required a significant portion of Egypt's resources. Workers were compensated with food, beer, and other essentials. Talk about a benefits package. But this investment wasn't just about vanity. It was about ensuring the pharaoh's smooth transition into the afterlife, which in turn was believed to secure the continued prosperity of the land. You could say the real pyramid scheme was ensuring the pharaoh's afterlife was as secure as a Swiss bank account. Despite their divine status, pharaohs had to navigate the very human challenges of ruling a vast and diverse empire. They managed a complex bureaucracy that would make any modern government look like a lemonade stand. Taxes were collected in the form of grain, livestock, and labor, fueling both the state's coffers and its expansive building projects. The Nile's annual floods were both a blessing and a curse. Vital for agriculture, yet unpredictable and potentially devastating. The pharaoh's ability to maintain ma'at, the concept of cosmic order, was constantly under scrutiny. A bad flood year could easily be seen as a sign of divine displeasure, turning the populace from adoration to unrest faster than you can say Tutankhamun. And then there was the matter of succession, a game of thrones that often played out with deadly consequences. Unlike the romanticized notion of peaceful transitions, the reality was more often a tangled web of intrigue and familial power struggles. Take the case of Hatshepsut, one of the few female pharaohs who had to present herself as a male ruler to legitimize her reign, or the infamous Akhenaten, whose radical religious reforms nearly tore the kingdom apart. These were not just stories of power, they were tales of survival in a world where divine right didn't always guarantee a peaceful reign. While the pharaoh's images projected an aura of timeless stability, their reigns were anything but static. They engaged in diplomacy, war, and trade, extending Egypt's influence far beyond the fertile banks of the Nile. They brokered alliances through marriage, sending daughters off to foreign courts to cement ties with powerful neighbors. This was International Relations 101, ancient style, complete with the occasional saber-rattling and territorial skirmishes. Despite their godlike status, pharaohs were ultimately human, subject to the same frailties and ambitions as any other ruler. Their divine image was as much a shield as it was a tool of control, used to maintain order in a land where chaos was always a misstep away. In the end, the pharaohs were both legends and leaders, navigating a world as complex and unpredictable as their own labyrinthine tombs. As we peel back the layers of their reigns, we find a fascinating blend of myth and reality, an enduring testament to the ingenuity and audacity of ancient Egypt's most illustrious rulers. As the curtain falls on the pharaoh's grand drama, let's shift the spotlight to those who ensured the show ran smoothly, the viziers and nobility, the unsung heroes and occasional villains in Egypt's epic tale. These folks were the power brokers operating just a heartbeat away from divinity, a position that came with perks and pitfalls aplenty. First up, the vizier, or as we call them today, the CEO of Ancient Egypt Inc. This wasn't just some ceremonial gig. The vizier was the pharaoh's right-hand person, the ultimate bureaucratic boss who kept the kingdom's wheels turning. Picture a figure, clad in a crisp white linen kilt, juggling scrolls instead of spreadsheets, managing everything from tax collection to public works. They were the ones who turned the pharaoh's divine whims into practical reality, balancing the books and ensuring the grain silos were full. Let's take a closer look at one of history's most famous viziers, Imhotep, who served under Pharaoh Djoser. Not only was he a political whiz, but he also moonlighted as an architect, physician, and sage. Imhotep designed the Step Pyramid, the world's first major stone structure, around 2670 BCE. This was no small feat. It was a six-tiered colossus that laid the groundwork for the grand pyramids to come. You might say Imhotep was ancient Egypt's Renaissance man, centuries before the Renaissance was cool. The vizier's role was all about multitasking on a scale that would make even the busiest modern executive break a sweat. They oversaw a sprawling bureaucracy that would make today's DMV look like child's play. Think of them as the ultimate middle managers, caught between the divine demands of the pharaoh and the very human needs of the populace. And let's not forget the occasional uprisings or natural calamities, which were sort of par for the course in ancient times, because nothing says job security like a good old-fashioned flood that could turn the fertile Nile Delta into a soggy mess. The nobility, meanwhile, were the power players and political influencers who orbited the throne, each angling for favour and a slice of the proverbial pie. Their lives were a mix of privilege and peril, where one wrong move could see them trading their gilded villas for a dank cell, or worse. These were the folks who managed the estates, collected taxes, and governed the provinces on behalf of the pharaoh. They were the regional managers, tasked with maintaining law and order across Egypt's expansive lands. Being part of the nobility came with some sweet perks. Access to luxury goods, opulent banquets, and prime real estate along the Nile were just the start. The wealthier nobles had sprawling estates with lush gardens and private chapels, all maintained by scores of servants. But this lifestyle required constant vigilance. The political landscape was as treacherous as the crocodile-infested Nile. Remember, ancient Egypt was no stranger to court intrigue, with backstabbing and betrayal running rampant, often with lethal consequences. The nobility's power wasn't just about wealth, it was about influence. These were the power brokers who could make or break pharaohs, and they knew it. They built alliances through marriage and mutual interests, often forming complex networks that rivaled any soap opera plot. And just like in any good drama, there were those who rose to power and those who fell from grace, often spectacularly. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was that life in the upper echelons of Egyptian society was a constant hustle. The nobles were the ultimate networkers, perfecting the art of schmoozing long before LinkedIn made it easy. They had to keep the pharaoh happy, their rivals at bay, and their estates profitable, all while maintaining an image of effortless grace and divine favour. It was a juggling act worthy of Cirque du Soleil, but with higher stakes. In terms of administration, the ancient Egyptian bureaucracy was a well-oiled machine, if you could ignore the occasional sand in the gears. Taxes were a complex affair, involving grain, cattle, and labour. A far cry from today's cash transactions, but remarkably effective in keeping the economy afloat. The viziers and nobility had to ensure that the tax collectors were honest, the storerooms full, and the workers motivated, which was no small feat in the society where the Nile's whims dictated prosperity. And let's not forget the paperwork. Ancient Egyptians were prolific record keepers, their papyrus scrolls serving as the spreadsheets and databases of their time. From grain inventories to legal documents, the viziers oversaw a mountain of administrative tasks that would make any modern-day bureaucrat's head spin. It's no wonder that literacy and numeracy were prized skills among the elite, as the ability to read and write could make all the difference in a land where knowledge was power. The similarities between ancient Egyptian bureaucracy and modern office politics are uncanny. Just like today, it was all about who you knew and how you maneuvered within the system. Networking, alliances, and strategic partnerships were as crucial then as they are now. The stakes might have been higher. After all, losing your job could mean losing your head. But the fundamental dynamics of power and politics remain strikingly familiar. So, while the pharaohs basked in their divine glow, it was the viziers and nobility who kept the kingdom from descending into chaos. They were the unsung heroes of ancient Egypt, the ones who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that the great machine of state continued to hum along smoothly. Their legacy is a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the timeless dance of power and politics, a dance that continues to this day, albeit with less linen and more polyester. As the nobility navigated their treacherous social labyrinth, the scribes and priests wielded the true power of ancient Egypt, knowledge. Forget the swords and chariots. In this world, the pen was mightier than any bronze weapon. These guys were the brainiacs of the Nile, the nerds who ran the show from behind a desk covered in papyrus scrolls. Let's start with the scribes. If you think today's tech whizzes have it good, scribes were the original tech gurus, armed not with laptops but with reed brushes and ink. Being a scribe in ancient Egypt was like having the ultimate job security. Why? Because they were among the few who could read and write, skills that were as rare as an Egyptian winter. In a society where literacy was about as common as finding a vegan at a barbecue, scribes were the gatekeepers of all things written. They documented everything from tax records to military campaigns, making sure the pharaoh's decrees were carved into history, literally. The importance of scribes can't be overstated. They were the ones who kept the wheels of the state turning, ensuring that every grain of wheat and drop of beer was accounted for. Their work was so vital that they were exempt from taxes and military service perks that even modern accountants might envy. And let's face it, when you can dodge both the taxman and the draft, you know you're onto a good thing. Now, scribes didn't just pop out of a sarcophagus knowing how to write. They went through rigorous training which began at a young age. The scribe schools, akin to our modern universities, were where young boys, sorry ladies, it was boys only, learned the art of hieroglyphs. This was no casual endeavour. Mastering the complex script could take years. But once trained, a scribe had access to a world of opportunities, ranging from government positions to temple duties. Speaking of temples, let's not forget the priests, the other half of Egypt's intellectual powerhouse duo. If scribes were the Google of ancient Egypt, priests were the spiritual app store gatekeepers of divine knowledge and spiritual guidance. These were the guys who held the keys to the afterlife, and they took their job seriously. They performed rituals, maintained temples, and ensured that the gods were kept happy, which in turn kept the Nile flowing and the crops growing. Priests in ancient Egypt wielded considerable influence, not just spiritually, but politically and economically. Temples were major centers of wealth and power, owning vast tracts of land and employing thousands. Talk about a side hustle. Running a temple was like managing a Fortune 500 company, complete with real estate portfolios and a workforce to boot. Priests were often drawn from the nobility, ensuring that family connections and spiritual duties were neatly entwined, and making sure the gods and the pharaoh were never out of favor. Now, here's where it gets interesting. While we might picture priests as solemn and pious, the reality was often more colorful. Many priests were married, had families, and lived relatively secular lives outside their temple duties. In fact, temple service was often a part-time gig, with priests rotating duties so they could manage their estates or pursue other interests. Think of it as the ultimate work-life balance, ancient style. But before we get too misty-eyed with romantic notions of scholarly scribes and pious priests, let's remember the harsh realities. These roles were not purely altruistic. They were about power and influence. Knowledge was currency, and those who held it could shape the fate of the nation. The priests, for example, had the ear of the gods, or so they claimed, and could sway public opinion and royal decisions. It's a bit like having a direct line to the CEO in today's corporate world, Only the CEO is a deity with a penchant for cats and canopies. Despite the allure of power, the stakes were high. Fail to perform the correct rituals, and you risked the wrath of the gods and the people. A bad harvest or a plague could turn a grateful populace into a lynch mob faster than you can say Tutankhamun. And for scribes, a mistake in the records could lead to severe repercussions, like losing a hand or worse. Accuracy wasn't just important, it was a matter of life and limb. The legacy of these intellectual titans is immense. The records they kept have provided us with a window into a world long gone, revealing a society as complex and nuanced as any today. From the Great Pyramid texts, which are among the oldest religious writings in the world, to the detailed administrative records that reveal the daily workings of Egyptian life, scribes and priests left behind a treasure trove of knowledge that continues to inform and inspire. As we peel back the layers of their world, we find a society where knowledge was power, and those who wielded it shaped the destiny of a civilization. The scribes and priests were the unsung heroes of ancient Egypt, the ones who ensured that the great machine of state ran smoothly and that the lines between the mortal and divine were expertly navigated. Their story is a testament to the enduring power of the written word and the timeless quest for understanding, a quest that continues to resonate with us today as we seek to unravel the mysteries of our own world. So, as we prepare to turn the page and delve deeper into the heart of ancient Egypt, let's keep in mind the ink-stained hands and incense-scented robes of those who wrote the scripts and whispered the prayers that kept the kingdom alive. These intellectual heavyweights were the true architects of Egyptian society, building bridges between worlds with nothing more than papyrus and prayer. And that, dear friends, is a legacy worth exploring further. The ink-stained hands and incense-scented robes have guided us through the corridors of ancient Egyptian power. But now it's time to roll up those sleeves and get to work with the artisans and merchants, the unsung heroes who kept the economy buzzing like a Nile-side market at dawn. Let's start with the artisans, the ancient world's equivalent of today's gig economy workers, but without the luxury of swiping left on a bad job. These craftsmen were the magicians who turned raw materials into objects of beauty, filling tombs and temples with treasures that still leave us awestruck. But before we get swept away by visions of gold-leaf masterpieces, let's talk about the gritty reality of their daily grind. Picture this. You're a stone carver in Thebes, and your task is to chisel a life-size statue of a pharaoh, let's say Ramses II, out of a solid block of granite. This isn't just an exercise in patience, it's a Herculean feat of endurance and skill. The tools? Primitive copper chisels and stone hammers. The timeline? Just a couple of years if you're lucky. And the pay? Enough bread and beer to keep you going, not much more. While Ramses might get all the glory, it's the artisans who carved his legacy into the annals of history, one painstaking chip at a time. Then there's the tomb painting crew, the original interior decorators of the afterlife. Armed with natural pigments, think crushed malachite for green and ochre for red. They transformed bare walls into vibrant narratives of life, death, and everything in between. These artists had to be more than just skilled painters. They were storytellers who captured the essence of pharaohs and gods, ensuring their deeds were immortalized for eternity. But let's not romanticize it too much. These artisans worked in cramped, dark conditions, meticulously applying paint while fighting off the ever-present dust of the tombs. And while their work glows with life, their own stories often faded into the shadows, unsung and unrecorded. Now, speaking of shadowy figures, let's switch gears to the merchants, the wheels of commerce that connected Egypt to the wider world. These were the folks who turned the Nile into a bustling trade highway, ferrying goods up and down its waters with a nimbleness that would make any modern logistics manager green with envy. From Nubia came gold and ivory, from Lebanon the prized cedar wood, and from the far-off lands of Punt, exotic spices and incense. Egyptian merchants weren't just traders, they were cultural ambassadors, weaving Egypt into a rich tapestry of international commerce. But don't be fooled by the romantic notion of trade as a peaceful exchange. The life of a merchant was no walk in the papyrus grove. It was fraught with peril, unpredictable flooding, bandits lurking on riverbanks, and the constant threat of deals turning sourer than a bad batch of beer. Yet, for those who succeeded, The rewards were as bountiful as the Nile's floodwaters. Successful merchants could amass wealth, influence, and even climb the social ladder, proof that hard work and a little risk-taking were as valuable then as they are now. Trade wasn't just about goods, it was about information. Merchants were the conduits of news, spreading tales of distant lands and foreign customs. Through them, Egypt learned of the world beyond its borders, gaining knowledge that was as valuable as any cargo of gold. These trade routes were the ancient version of the internet, connecting cultures and ideas in a web of exchange that shaped the course of history. And let's not forget the bustling markets of Egypt's cities, where merchants haggled over prices with the zeal of a Wall Street trader. These marketplaces were the heart of economic life, noisy, chaotic, and brimming with energy. Here, you could find everything from grain and livestock to luxury items like perfume and fine linen. It was a place where social classes mingled, and fortunes could be made or lost in the blink of an eye. In a land where survival often depended on the whims of the Nile, the market was a microcosm of Egyptian society, a place where everyone, from slaves to nobles, tried to carve out their share of prosperity. Of course, the romanticized image of a bustling, harmonious marketplace is just that, romanticized. The reality was far more complex, with merchants navigating a maze of taxes, regulations, and the ever-present threat of corruption. To succeed, they needed more than just a keen sense of trade, they needed street smarts and a network of connections that would make LinkedIn blush. The artisans and merchants of ancient Egypt were the backbone of its economy, the unsung heroes who toiled away to create the wealth and beauty that defined this legendary civilization. Their labor wasn't just about producing goods, it was about crafting a legacy that would endure for millennia. And while the pharaohs and priests might have claimed the spotlight, it was these hard-working individuals who kept the kingdom running, ensuring that the great machine of state continued to hum along smoothly. As we delve deeper into their world, we uncover a story of resilience, creativity, and ambition. A story that resonates with us today as we navigate our own complex, interconnected world. So, as we prepare to explore the next chapter of Egypt's grand saga, let's tip our hats to the artisans and merchants, the original hustlers who proved that with a little grit and determination, you can turn dreams into reality, one stone, one brushstroke, and one trade deal at a time. As we tip our hats to the artisans and merchants, it's time to dig into the down and dirty reality of ancient Egypt's backbone, the farmers and labourers. These were the salt-of-the-earth folks who, quite literally, kept the wheels of Egyptian society turning with their sweat and toil. Forget the glitz and glamour of the pharaohs or the backroom deals of the nobility. These were the original unsung heroes, toiling under the relentless Egyptian sun to keep the civilization fed and the economy afloat. Let's get one thing straight. Farming in ancient Egypt was no picnic. It wasn't about waking up at dawn to sip coffee while admiring the sunrise over the Nile. It was grueling, back-breaking work that followed a strict agricultural calendar dictated by the river's whims. The Nile, blessed and cursed, was the lifeblood of Egyptian agriculture. Its annual floods deposited rich silt onto the fields, creating some of the most fertile soil on the planet. But this wasn't some idyllic pastoral scene. It was a full-blown tactical operation, with farmers racing against time to plant, harvest, and store grains before the next flood cycle washed away their efforts. The agricultural year was divided into 3 seasons: Akhet, flooding; Peret, growing; and Shimu, harvest. During Akhet, fields were submerged, so farmers turned to maintenance work like tool-making and repairing the irrigation channels. Then came Peret, when the waters receded, and it was all hands on deck to sow the crops. Finally, Shemu was the make-or-break harvest season. Success meant a full granary and a sigh of relief. Failure could spell disaster. It was a relentless cycle, as predictable as it was unforgiving, underscoring the harsh reality that the Nile, giver of life, could just as easily become a harbinger of ruin. And what did these farmers get for their hard labour? A diet that was, let's say, less Michelin-starred and more survivalist. Bread and beer were staples, with the occasional fish or fowl for those who could manage it. Vegetables? Sure, but only if the harvest was good. It was a life of subsistence, punctuated by moments of celebration that marked successful harvests or religious festivals. The farmers' lives might seem a world away from the opulence of the pharaohs, but in reality They were the foundation of the entire Egyptian economy, the silent partners in a civilization that reached for the stars, or at least the afterlife. Now, let's shift our gaze to the laborers, the human engines behind Egypt's monumental architecture. Forget about slaves pulling stones through the desert under the whip's crack. That's a Hollywood concoction. The reality was far more nuanced and, dare I say, organized. Workers on state projects like the pyramids were paid laborers, often drafted from the agricultural class during the flood season when farming was impossible. They were compensated with food, beer, and lodging. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a company cafeteria and employee housing. These laborers were organized into crews with specific tasks, overseen by foremen who ensured the work progressed smoothly. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, wasn't built by the mythical slaves of yore, but by a workforce of skilled laborers and craftsmen. It's estimated that about 20,000 to 30,000 workers were involved in the construction, which took around 20 years. That's a 2-decade-long project to build what was essentially a pharaoh's vanity project and a monumental feat of engineering that still boggles the mind today. But let's not romanticize their lives. Despite being wage laborers, these workers faced harsh conditions and grueling schedules. The work was dangerous, with injury or death a constant risk. And while they were fed and housed, their contributions were often overshadowed by the grandeur of the monuments they built. The pyramids might have been symbols of divine power and royal prestige, but they were also testaments to human perseverance and the relentless drive to create something that would stand the test of time. So, as we wrap up this journey through the social hierarchy of ancient Egypt, let's pause and reflect on the farmers and laborers who, despite their obscurity in the grand narrative, were the bedrock of one of history's most remarkable civilizations. They were the nameless, faceless mass whose toil allowed the pharaohs to rule, the priests to pray, and the scribes to write. Their legacy is etched not just in the stones of pyramids, but in the very fabric of Egyptian society. In the end, ancient Egypt's story is one of human ambition and ingenuity, a civilization built on the backs of those who toiled in the fields and quarries. It's a testament to what people can achieve when driven by a vision, whether divine or earthly. And while we often remember the kings and gods, it's the ordinary people, the farmers, laborers, scribes, artisans, and merchants who truly shaped the world of the pharaohs. So next time you marvel at the grandeur of the pyramids, take a moment to remember those who made it all possible, one grain of sand, one stone block, one harvest at a time.